なぜに人はさまようそれじゃ抗い続けることで確かめるヒューマニティ
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are bringing you our next installment in Weekly Suit Gundam as we talk about one of the more obscure corners of the Gundam universe with the CGI OVA series MS Igloo.
Yes, MS Igloo and MS Igloo 2, which is 9 episodes in total of 3D CG only Gundam.
One of them is good.
It's an interesting series.
Yeah, I mean one of the two series.
Yes.
Not one episode. There is more than one good episode, but not that many. That will be later today, so leave you in suspense over which part of MS Igloo we think is good.
I mean, if you've seen it, you probably know.
Yeah. All right. So we will be doing that later today. Before then, we're going to hit up just the normal stuff and news and all of that. And if things sound different, that's because we are in my parents' house in Colorado. This is only the second time we've recorded here. Yes. And we are because everyone's in the house today, we are in their basement, which is unfinished and has very different acoustics than anywhere else we've ever recorded, except probably if you go back to the absolute earliest episodes when Sean's parents' basement was unfinished.
Yes.
It probably sounded like this.
Yes, so it's a lot of like concrete walls, and though it's very echoey, and probably sounds really epic and momentous.
Exactly. I mean, Sean, I don't ever talk down here, so now we're speaking and I realize my voice sounds different down here.
Yes.
Because normally I'm down here like working quietly or playing games. But anyway, so that's what you will hear. And Sean, we are back home for a couple weeks, but these might be our last in-person podcast recordings for a long time because you have some news for us.
Yeah, so I think before we talk about the news, just like really quick, want to make it very clear that this is not something that's going to like affect the podcast in any way other than maybe there will be a week off in the near future, although we'll try to avoid that. But yeah, I'm going to be moving to Texas in a week. For me, we will be moving out, I think June 2nd is when I'm getting out of here.
Holy crap.
Yes, which I've lived in Colorado my whole life. It's definitely like a big thing. So this has obviously been something that's been like happening for a while. For a little bit of context, part of the reason why this is happening is that basically my position at the school I'm currently working at, I'm currently working at until this Friday at 10 in the morning. That position is being terminated more or less because of COVID budgetary stuff, which is something I found out like at the end of February. So it's something I've known for a while, something I knew was probably going to happen because I don't know if people knew, but schools got fucked by all this COVID stuff. So it was me and I think about 7 other positions at the school. And I say positions because it's basically, they're just cutting down on staff, right? So there's basically, every department is losing 1 teacher, and then we lost like 1 assistant principal, more or less, to staff down. So that happened in February.
Why can't they just get rid of all the assistant principals? Those people did fucking nothing.
You know what, we definitely had the 1 extra assistant principal. I will say the other ones we needed. We had the 1, and it was obvious to everybody. Nobody knew what that guy did, because everyone else handled, like, you know what the guy who handles all the athletics side does. That makes sense. You know the person who, like, is, like, the director of liaison for the district, and she handles all, like, the testing and SAT and organizes all that stuff, which is a lot of work. That makes sense. And then there was this one other guy. Nobody knew what he did. And nobody will ever know now because he's also, his last day is this Friday. But yeah, so that happened in conjunction with my parents had already been planning a move, mostly related to like health stuff, with like breathing and everything in Colorado is rough if you have breathing issues because the air here is very thin. And then my brother, who people on podcasts might remember, got married last November. He already lives in the Houston, Texas area. So kind of a lot of events happened at the same time that the thing that makes the most sense is for all of us to move. So I'll be moving next Tuesday down to, it is in the like Houston area, which is kind of meaningless as I'm beginning to understand because that city is gigantic. So It's somewhere in Houston.
You also have not been there yet.
Yes, I've not been there. All I've heard and like looked at maps and be like, oh, this is like larger than the United Kingdoms, basically. This is a big fucking city.
Yeah, so you will give us more information once you're there and have, you know, scoped the place out. Yeah, so I think, Sean, I think this is a good plan. I think it is a better plan than staying in Colorado with a rising cost of living, lowering funding for education, because Colorado is just terrible with education, and no family here. So I think Texas, on all three counts, better move.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited for it, because again, this is stuff that I've been working on for a while. If people are wondering, have been wondering on the podcast, why has it taken Sean approximately 5 bajillion years to play Yakuza 7? This is the exact reason. I started playing that game more or less at the exact time I was finding out that I wouldn't have a job here anymore, and there was like, oh, okay, shit, we are going to move earlier than I was thinking that my parents are going to move. And so it was like, well, I'll pick away at Yakuza while I'm dealing with what do I do, and like I have like plans for what I'll do in terms of like career type stuff also. So
yeah, it was kind of the unspoken thing on the last couple months of this podcast.
Exactly. Yes.
But Sean, I am happy for you. I am excited. I mean, you've never lived outside of Colorado, right?
Not long term, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an exciting adventure. Texas is cool. I've only been to the Austin area. And I'm also realizing, now that I think about it, boy, that's very far from Houston, even though I think of them as relatively close to each other, which they are relatively, but Texas...
Yeah, Texas and California are the two states that, like, you have to recalibrate your sense of scale for where things are, because, yes, they are gigantic.
Yeah, I know. It's like... I live in Iowa, and I can drive from one side of the state to the other in 3-4 hours. Mm-hmm. So that is not possible in Texas. So yeah, it's crazy. I wish you well. You brought me a box of goodies from your move.
Yes, I brought you all the PS3 games I bought that one summer in the condo where you left your PS3 and your piece of shit controller and took your good controller with you. And so you now have...
We're never letting that go.
No, I'm never letting it go. Every time I think about that summer, I think about, man, that was awesome just getting to play like 8 years worth of great exclusives for a console without having to pay any money for the console. I paid for the games, but they were all super cheap. And then I'll think about that, and I'll also think about, and then he made me use his shitty fucking controller too, that asshole. But yeah, so you now have like PS3 copies of Killzone 1, 2, and 3. Don't play 1. 2 is pretty good. 3 is okay. The God of War games like Uncharted, which now there are better versions of those. The Infamous games, which those are pretty good. You also have the one solitary Wii U game I ever owned, Breath of the Wild, which I bought when you let me borrow your Wii U, and the tablet controller. You didn't, which I guess is the shitty controller for the Wii U.
You had to. I thought I gave you the Pro Controller too to play that.
I think you did. I don't remember.
Yeah,
I was just trying to make a joke about shitty controllers.
That's okay.
Let me play on your consoles.
The Wii U, actually, the Wii U Pro Controller was pretty good. That was I actually like that more than the Switch Pro Controller. Yeah. But yeah, I don't have my PS3 with me or anything, but I have kind of a retro game collection, so I'm happy to throw them in there.
Yeah. I figured that you might want to hold on to that. Also, all the VHS tapes that are not like sticky with some unknown substance because they had just been in a closet for like 20 years.
My parents did find there's a TV, you can see it over there in the basement that has a VCR attached to it. So I might hook that up and have some fun. Because putting in VHS tapes, it's not even the movies. It's like the ads that are the fun part on VHS tapes. Mm-hmm. But Sean, you brought me all that stuff, and thank you. And I actually have a present for you, too.
Oh, wow.
You're looking at it. You notice that this microphone looks different than my normal microphone?
Yes, I did.
It's because it's black. I bought you a Blue Yeti.
Wow.
As your going away present to go to Texas. I have been meaning to do this for a while so that because I use a Blue Yeti, you use our old Blue Snowball. They're both really good, but the Blue Yeti is better in several different ways, and then we will be in parity on using the same mic. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to do it, this is the time. So we're using it now to record.
Yeah.
But this is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope the value proposition of like 10 old PS3 games, an old Wii U game, of a copy of a game that nobody would ever play on Wii U, just play it on the Switch, and like Godzilla Destroy All Monsters and Lion King on VHS tape. I hope that That it's an equivalent trade.
It's worth it. Not monetarily, it's not.
No,
but it's
not,
worth
but yeah.
it's worth it to me. This was not. I bought this weeks ago. This was not because you said the other day, "Hey, do you want some old PS3 games?" And I went, "Oh, I feel so guilty. I've got to go buy him a mic." No, I'd been planning this for a while, and I thought this was the right time. And I'm actually jealous of this because I think the black is a very cool color for this mic.
It's a very sleek microphone. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
You're welcome, and it'll hopefully make the podcast sound even better as we continue recording remotely, which is how we've been doing this most of the time.
Yeah,
anyway,
I'm glad that we solved the remote podcast stuff years ago, so I didn't have to think about that on top of moving.
Yeah, and it honestly got even easier this last year when we all collectively discovered Zoom.
Yes.
Which was like this pretty good software that I feel like nobody knew about until the pandemic.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you'll still, for the foreseeable future, be at Iowa University, because my good Zoom account will disappear with my current employment.
Yes.
Which I realized the other day, I'm like, oh shit, I won't get like the super premium Zoom anymore for free.
Yeah, I have it all through the universe. So I don't even know what like non-premium Zoom looks like because I started using it because they told me to at Iowa, and I'm like, okay, yeah. So anyway, so nothing about the podcast is really going to be changing, as you can tell. There will probably be fewer of these like holiday and summer get-together episodes.
But we'll still be recording episodes. We just won't be in the same room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So. And it's going to be an exciting adventure. There'll be lots of stories. There might be a week off soon. We might also be recording an extra something that'll come up in that week. But just know, next couple weeks, if there's an interruption, that's why. I think it's a good excuse.
Yes, yeah.
But we do have plans. And,
we've taken weeks off for way worse reasons than one of us is moving halfway across the country. Yeah.
Yes. Somehow when we did the Iowa one, we pre-recorded enough that there was literally no interruption, and that is still, I think, the most impressive logistical thing we've ever pulled off.
That's why I want to try not to break the streak with this one.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll do our best.
So, anyway, and this is also probably the reason why Weekly Suit Gundam has been a little slower lately, but we will be picking that up again, and today you're hearing MS Igloo, which is the one everyone's really been waiting for.
Yeah, I've really wanted to get this one in the can, because I know that, like, our Twitters have been bombarded with hot MS Igloo takes, and everyone's just desperate to find out what we think about the CG Gundam.
Look, we obey the continuity, all right?
Exactly.
It's on the list. It's on the fucking list. So, Sean, do you want to tell us your stuff? I mean, you kind of already told us the basics, but...
Yeah, that's the big stuff. A couple of other things I've been doing. I do want to mention I'm about halfway through Press Reset, Jason Schreier's new book that you talked about last episode. Mostly want to talk about it just because it is really good. I agree with your assessment, even just halfway through. I do think it's even better than Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which is also a really interesting book if you're into video games. And this one, I think... it's particularly interesting because it's so much more focused around a particular period of time in video game history, which is basically the main focus is 2010 to about 2014. Like there's stuff a little bit before and after, but that's where like really drills down to like the major events it focuses in on. So it's that transitionary period at the end of the 360 PS3 generation, where like we talked about last episode, game publishers just decided that video game consoles were dead for no reason whatsoever. They're like, it's all Farmville and Facebook from now on, guys. And everything needs to have like a multiplayer mode and all that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to read that side of stuff that like he'll bring up games that are like weird obscure games or like news stories and things from that period that I remember because that's around when we started the podcast.
Exactly.
And started paying attention to that kind of news more closely. And then for me, like I've started listening to like the Giant Bombcast and stuff like that. Started paying attention to that side of the industry more than just playing games, but what was going on behind the scenes. And the chapter I just finished, which is I think my favorite one so far, is the last one in the kind of like BioShock Infinite cycle, where there's a series of chapters on BioShock Infinite and then like what sprouted from the very tumultuous development of that game. And the last chapter in that sort of cycle is talking a lot about the Bureau XCOM Declassified.
Right. That one's fascinating.
Yes, the game that history forgot, which so far is the most interesting one because it is this like game that is inexplicable, and it always felt like an inexplicable video game. Why did 2K buy the rights to this beloved old PC strategy franchise just to turn it into a first-person shooter that languished in development for years, eventually turned into a third-person shooter, like a generic cover-based third-person shooter that ended up coming out after their really successful beloved reboot of XCOM as a strategy game, and then they just farted out like 2 years after that this weird third-person cover, like Gears of War XCOM game that nobody has played. And then reading the behind the scenes of like, nobody can explain why this game got made. It's
and
like,
no one enjoyed working on it. No one wanted to work on it. No one was into it.
Everyone at 2K Marin, which 2K Marin and 2K Australia were the two studios that handled the major development of that game, which there's a lot of interesting internal politics around that. Everyone was just like, this is a bad idea. Why, like, everyone's going to hate this. Why would we ever do this? And there's this really fascinating sequence of paragraphs of just talking about, like, nobody could understand why 2K and Take-Two didn't just cancel the game. Like, why was this game they're so desperate to make that they wouldn't cancel it and just move these people onto another project? And that is to me the most interesting story, because it feels the most video game industry story ever. Of like, some executive got it in their fucking head that they wanted this goddamn XCOM shooter to come out, and they spent like 6 years in like 3 development teams and just like burned through developer after developer after developer by throwing them onto this burning project. And then it came out and it flopped. Nobody gave a shit. It got like panned by the critics, and then nobody remembers that game came out. I would never have remembered it if they hadn't been like him like talking about this XCOM shooter, and I'm like, oh my god, he's talking about the Bureau. Oh my god, eventually this chapter is going to turn into they're making the Bureau that XCOM shooter. And it's a great story, and like a great like the way that Jason Schreier tells it through the lens of all these different developers he interviewed, it is fascinating.
It's so good. The suspense for that chapter for me was, did that game ever come out? Because I couldn't remember if that was a game like I saw at E3 and then was canceled, or if it actually launched. And it was like it did, and then I had to go look up like videos and stuff. Like every chapter of this book ended with me going to the internet and like looking different things up, whether like cool indie games that people made. There's a lot of that from like the dregs of the BioShock Infinite devs who went out there and that BioShock Infinite Chapter 2, that one is super interesting for us, I think, because we covered that pretty in depth on the podcast over the years.
Yeah.
But then going back and like obviously this version of the story has a lot more detail in it, and just the excruciating way that went down, where Ken Levine, not out of malice or anything, but decided he wanted to go into a smaller development headspace. Because
that's when like indies were just becoming a bigger thing. So it's like I think he saw that opportunity. Was like, well, that's what I want to make games the way I did when he helped make System Shock 2.
Right. So 2K set up for him this little like 10-person studio that is apparently still working. Nothing has come of it yet.
Yeah.
But like with its own sort of management structure, similar to like the deal Rockstar gets, just a lot smaller. And Ken Levine assumed, which I think would be a pretty natural assumption, that his team back at Irrational just shipped fucking BioShock Infinite, which was this massive critical commercial success. They'd be fine without him. And instead, 2K went, lol, no, Irrational is shut down if you're not there. Which is like, what horrible guilt that man probably has to live with, in addition to also apparently being kind of a dick as a dev. But like, that is such a crazy story.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely, again, it just shines a light on that stuff that like I've like half forgotten. Like I remember how scandalous that studio shutdown was when it happened, because again, like we would have talked about it on the podcast at the time. Like it just said like came out of nowhere. And it was interesting that like I don't think I had ever quite put together that, and this like book kind of makes it more clear, that part of like the big indie revolution that happened in like from like 2012 to 2014, after the like initial Xbox Live Arcade phase, then you moved into this kind of bigger phase with like Gone Home being probably like the biggest poster child of that. That happened because studios like 2K so mismanaged that console era transition. They just burned through so many really, really great talented people that saw, because of games like Braid and things like that that had come out a few years earlier, that there was a market now for smaller games made by smaller teams for like cheaper, both on the consumer side and on the developer side, that was a market that you could now go to. And like they kind of like those big publishers like EA and Take-Two and stuff, like they made their own competition by burning through devs that then went off to like make this whole fascinating indie scene of like really good small experimental titles.
And there's a bunch of stories like that in the book. It's those are like the happy endings to these stories. They're not all happy, but the devs who get away and like make successful indie studios. And it's really fascinating. I mean, I feel like the closure of Irrational is just the best example ever of like the utter mismanagement of the video game industry, that you could have a studio that strong and then go, close it. Like, what is that would be like if fucking Pixar got Toy Story 2 out the door, big hit, makes all this money, you did it, you made the sequel, and then they shut down Pixar.
Yeah, it's like everybody bought into the auteur theory way too much of like,
Right.
like we get like Ken Levine, he seems like a very like smart creative guy. It's also very clear that he was not a particularly good like team lead. He's a good like creative like creator person and like designer, but maybe not like the guy you want leading a group of 200 people. Like, it feels clear reading that chapter. He was probably very right to say, I shouldn't be in this position. I'm good. I could maybe do good stuff with a small team, although who knows? He hasn't fucking made anything with that small team. Who knows what's going on there? I know he's done like screenplays and stuff since then also. But like, just because you don't have poster boy Ken Levine at your studio doesn't mean you have to then fire 200 super talented people who have made this like really great game.
It's just like no other industry would that happen.
Yes.
That is an insane choice to make. And yeah, just the churn in this whole era that Schreier's talking about in this book of just kind of willy-nilly shutting studios down and like opening new ones and like kind of putting your finger in the wind and being like, iPhones, I guess. And just, and like, not that there isn't a big mobile market, but like just how bad they were at seeing the links.
Not understanding that like the mobile game market and the Facebook gaming market and the PC and console gaming market all can coexist, that they aren't.
It's all different things with people who have different skill sets. And,
they barely even compete with each other. If they do at all. Like, it's. I feel like you don't get to like a game that really unifies all of that until like this last year with Genshin Impact, right? Yeah.
That like actually understands the synthesis. But yeah, I mean, they were just so in the wrong headspace. But yeah, the second half of the book is when you get into all the fucking Kurt Schilling stuff, and oh my god.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that. One last thing I'll say about Press Reset is there has been something very cathartic about reading about a book that is about groups of people who are working in very mismanaged situations that, like, with their nose to the grindstone, getting burned the fuck out, and then just being told one day you don't have a job anymore. I'm like, yep, I can really sympathize with a lot of the death stories. Like, I know exactly how you feel right now. And it is legitimately cathartic to read those experiences and be like, okay, this happens to people because it fucking sucks.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. What else have you been up to? Anything else you want to tell us about?
Yeah, though I've been just kind of picking away at some other stuff. I continue to play here and there the Mercenaries mode in Resident Evil Village, especially.
It's very fun.
It's so good. I highly recommend people, again, if you haven't played it, check it out. It is also it is for me so far by far the most I have ever used the activities feature on PS5. I think I mentioned this last week, but if you are playing it on PS5, you can just go from the main menu of the PlayStation console, go to that activities thing by drilling down on the Village page, and the only two things there are load your last save and go to Mercenaries mode. You just go to Mercenaries and it loads right into it, and I've been hopping between that and Ratchet and Clank, the one that came out several years ago, as kind of like the big remake of the original game. And those are two games that are really fun to play in like quick little 30-minute bursts between packing stuff up and things like that. And yeah, Ratchet and Clank is fantastic. I'll have obviously more to say about that next week when I'm finished it. So maybe like a third of the way through. Is kind of hard to tell because I've just been kind of plucking away at it.
Yeah, and then we'll probably talk about it more when Rift Apart comes out. And we'll probably do a big Ratchet and Clank episode.
Yeah, my main take is just that like it is, if you kind of missed that era of PS2 character action kind of platformy games like that, and Sly Cooper and Jak and Daxter are like the three Sony ones from that period. It is a breath of fresh air just to be like, hey, I can just boot up this game. I'm like running around and hitting things with a wrench within 2 minutes. And then you just get like a new gun every 10 minutes, and you're just upgrading shit and jumping around and picking up dumb little collectibles, and it is just like a very fun video game. So I've been like to like 10 minutes of that, do something, go back, play like 10 minutes of Mercenaries mode in Resident Evil Village, and just jumping between those is really nice.
Nice. So, I played Resident Evil. I played Resident Evil. I played Ratchet and Clank, too, and we talked about that. And so because of that, I had to, I looked up a couple of guides on YouTube for different collectibles, right? Because I platinumed the game. Because of that, Ratchet and Clank winds up in my YouTube recommends. Yeah. Did you know there's a whole critical scene of people who despise, the remake and, Rift Apart, even though it's not out yet? Because, and I fucking quote, they made Ratchet, not edgy enough. Because Ratchet and Clank was super edgy, because one of the games was called Up Your Arsenal.
Yeah, and Going Commando.
Yeah, and I just want to scream at all of the people making these games, that's because you were a kid?
Yes.
that's not...
It's not edgy.
It's not edgy.
Yeah.
It's because you were a fucking kid. There's definitely people who are mad that there's a girl in Rift Apart who you play as.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously.
But yeah, there's like, this is a there's one that I found fucking hilarious where some Ratchet and Clank fan ranking all the games, and they had the remake down pretty low, and they start by just praising the remake for all the things it just objectively does well, like visuals and the super tight gameplay and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then goes, but, I had to rank it low because this game's a travesty on Ratchet and Clank because of how it changes the original story. I don't want to hear it from Captain Quark's perspective, and they rushed his redemption at the end. And it's just like the most awful mouth-breathing bullshit.
Yeah. It's, I haven't played any of the other Ratchet and Clank games. I mean, I'm familiar with them because you can't not be if you're into video games. Because, it's, that those three franchises, Jak, Sly Cooper, and Ratchet and Clank, defined Sony in that period. But yes, they were never fucking edgy. Jak was the one that went edgy. Jak and Daxter started very wholesome, and then they gave him a goatee in the second game, and it became very edgy. But yes, they had dumb puns that I think I for a long time assumed that Insomniac was a British-based developer entirely on the puns and the subtitles because it seemed like it's up your arsenal, right? It seemed like a very Lionhead Studios with Fable kind of dumb potty humor that you can't tell. Does anybody actually find it funny, or is it supposed to be funny because it isn't funny? That kind of thing. And my impression has always been hey, Ratchet and Clank are fun, iconic mascot type characters, and I really like them in this game. I think I really like Ratchet's characterization because I like that he's not dumb and incompetent or whatever, or bumbling, which is I feel like a lot of mascot characters end up in that.
Yeah.
Crash Bandicoot kind of has that characterization. It's sort of a default for a lot of those, and he's just this nice, earnest guy who's going and really believes in going around and helping out people with his gadgets and stuff. And I really like how he's characterized there, but also the story is not. It's so whatever.
It's not what you go there for. Yeah. I do think it's fun. It's fine, and I have seen some legitimate criticisms that there are some fun story points they didn't do, but it's not an exact remake. It's more of a sort of reimagining.
Yeah.
And it's the visuals are nice and colorful, but it's just a fun game. Clank's the best because his voice is just awesome. Mm-hmm. Clank is the one I think they've never recast because he's got such a perfect voice. But yeah, it is funny to remember that this is the game that came out around the time of the movie no one remembers.
Yes. They make a joke about it in one of the early cutscenes in a way that was yep, they did make that movie, huh?
Yep. Anyway, that's fun. Speaking of Resident Evil,
yes,
I have this week been playing Resident Evil 0, which is one of two numbered games in the Resident Evil series I've never played, 0 and 6. I'll back up for a second.
Yeah.
My brother and I, the other night, now that I'm here in Colorado, we booted up Resident Evil 6 on my Xbox, and we played through, 45 minutes of Leon's story. I thought it would take longer for me to get to the point where I got this is why people hate Resident Evil 6. It's immediate. Mm-hmm. It's not even that it's noticeably bad in its controls. It's not Sonic 06. It's not fucking broken or anything, right? What it is it's just the most boring fucking thing in the world where you go around, there are zombies, but the environments aren't that interesting. The zombies are extremely generic, boring. You shoot. There's none of the kind of friction Resident Evil usually gives you to make it entertaining and interesting. It's got the co-op from Resident Evil 5, but they've also kind of sanded down the edges from that. It is not good. At some point, because I'm a completionist, I want to play it, but ugh. But then I went to play 0, which is another one that I feel the fandom has maybe mixed reactions on. Resident Evil 0 is fucking phenomenal. Mm-hmm. It's a great game. I am pretty deep into it. And I have been, it's one of those games where I sit down to play it, and I play it way longer than I intend to, because it is the most direct sequel to the original. Because it was made the same year as the remake for the GameCube, so it's the only other game in that exact style, visually and everything. And it is, as I say, the most direct kind of sequel to to the original, because it is also you start on a train, which is fucking awesome, but then you're in a big compound mansion kind of thing, castle, and you're moving through, and it's that kind of the combat is just very de-emphasized. It is so much more about the exploration and the puzzle solving and all of that, because even in Resident Evil 2, the original version, there's way more combat and fast-paced stuff, right? But 0, it's just if you like that original Resident Evil, it is just fucking heaven. It's this little kind of hidden gem that's always been out there, but people don't talk about. Like, the initial section on the train, which is like maybe 90 minutes of play, is this just great. It's kind of like some of the different places in Village. That's just like this great concentrated burst of a Resident Evil level design, but it's all on a train, which is just awesome. And it's really gothic and crazy, and the visuals, like this and the original Resident Evil, or the remake, the 2002 Resident Evil, they have a serious claim to be the best looking video games ever made. Like, they really do. They are unbelievably gorgeous games. And Zero, in some ways, even more impressive because of just like because the train is like going full speed, and out the windows you can see like rain and stuff, and it's just some crazy stuff they do. And then you get into the main, like, this big sort of laboratory castle mansion thing in the Arklay Mountains, and that whole section. I mean, it's like the original Resident Evil. It's this very, very long, picking apart this like massive environment you have and all the puzzles you have to solve. And the big thing Resident Evil Zero adds is that you play as two characters. You play as Rebecca Chambers, who is in the original game. She's one of Stars, and Billy Cohen, who is a serial killer who we are told at the beginning killed 23 people, and that's why he's being transported to jail. But like then the zombies attack and he breaks out. He didn't actually kill 23 people. He's a good guy,
of course.
But Rebecca and Billy have to work together, and it is essentially like the craziest thing about it for me, Sean, is that it's what the single player mode of Resident Evil 5 should have been. Because if you don't know Resident Evil 5, it's all built around co-op, but if you're playing it in single player, it's almost unplayable because you just have to hope the AI is as smart as a person, and it's not. But Resident Evil 0, there is no actual co-op mode, but it is still all the two players. So you can press the button at any time and switch between them. Sometimes you have them all follow each other and move around together. Sometimes you split them up and they have to do things separately. But it's like, once you get into it, it's a very fluid system. They play slightly differently, in some fairly sexist ways. Like, Rebecca can't like turn a handle, so you always have to have.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's also the original Resident Evil also has a little bit of that with like Chris and Jill like are kind of like gendered in the way that the characters are different, but I do not to that degree. It's like different inventory slots and like total health and shit. Like
right. It's you know, from a gameplay sense, it doesn't matter at all. But it is like a very thin excuse for why like Rebecca has to go into some areas versus Billy. But it's fine. And I really enjoy they call it I think in the original marketing they called it like the character zapping system, which is a hilarious term. It is quite the like technological feat that they pulled it off on the GameCube back in the day, because it feels like something you would do on like the PS5 now, where you can have them in totally different areas, hit the button, and near instantaneously you go to them. And obviously, like, you know, it's because it's all pre-rendered backgrounds. I know it's not the most complex stuff, but it is impressive that it does that.
Yeah.
And I'm playing the modern, you know, HD remaster, which I'm sure is even faster. But yeah, it's a great game. I'm playing it on my PC. And here's something I have to recommend. This is also, I'm going back and I'm going to try to do the sequence of 0, 1, 2, 3, the original versions with tank controls and everything, because I've only ever played the remakes of 2 and 3. And when I played Resident Evil 1 Remake, I just used the default, like, modern controls, which are, like, your brain gets it more immediately, but then you play the game and you realize that they don't really work for the game that way.
Yeah.
Because the game was made for the tank controls. And I will say one way to quickly adapt to using tank controls is if you play it on the keyboard, there's something about having WASD instead of like a D-pad or a joystick that makes it even easier to just use the tank controls, because it's like 4 big buttons. They're separated. It's not like a D-pad where like they are all kind of on the same plane, and it just makes it very easy to play. And the fun thing about Resident Evil 0 is the mouse literally does nothing. It's a game you play entirely on the keyboard, which is kind of funny. But I've just been playing it on my keyboard, and like it's a really great way to play that game. I enjoy it very much. It makes a lot of like intuitive sense to me. But yeah, those you know, HD remasters of 0 and 1, the GameCube remake, are must-own games, I would argue. They are fucking great.
Yeah, I played the beginning of 0 forever ago, back when I played the remake of original Resident Evil, which I played on the GameCube. I mean, I played it like, I think I played it on my Wii, the GameCube version, but that's when I played it. I never finished 0, so I should go back, because I've been meaning to go back and replay through the remake of Resident Evil remake, re-remake, and play 0 also, so I should do that. Although I also still need to also play the remake of Resident Evil 2. Got a lot of Resident Evil remakes. Yeah, I need to get through.
They're all good. It's a good time for the series, and The only thing missing on modern consoles is I do wish they would put out the original versions of 2 and 3 just to supplement it all. Although I did realize the other day, an easy way I could play those games if I don't want to muck around with emulation, which sometimes drives me crazy, is I remembered that the PS Vita can play all the PS1 classics. And those games are all on there.
Yep.
So that's cool. Anyway, so yeah, that's my... I am on a very big Resident Evil kick. I'm on a horror game kick overall. I have on my desktop, I just installed Alien Isolation because I realized I got it for free from the Epic Game Store in one of their free giveaways. And I've always wanted to play that game. And I watched Alien 1 and then Covenant, which are my two favorite Alien movies, the other day to prepare. So at some point I want to play those. And I really do think, Sean, this basement environment at night when I turn the lights off will be the perfect way to play an incredibly scary game.
Yeah. If while you're on your PC horror game thing, you should play the original Fear. That's in that.
Oh, yeah.
That is a great PC shooter that also has some fun horror stuff. But yes, if you're doing your having fun playing first-person shooters with a mouse, Fear to me is one of those quintessential PC shooters that still holds up really well. I played through that again 2 or 3 years ago on my laptop. It was this game still fucking rules.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. It's cool. You
can probably get it for 50 cents or something. It came out in 2004 or 5.
Yeah, that is the nice thing about PC games is it is a PC is cheaper or is more expensive to buy and or build than a console, but games are even new quite a bit cheaper because there's so much competition in the store space. I got Resident Evil Village for $48 new. It's that kind of thing. Anyway, any other stuff to talk about before we move on to Gundam?
That's all my stuff.
All right, well, we'll be back later. If you're not listening to Gundam, we'll be back next week with some Batman stuff.
Yes.
But for now, if you are on the Gundam train with us, please stick around and hear us talk about MS Igloo, which I realize I don't know why it's called that.
Neither do I. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wacky and wonderful world of Gundam. And we're truly diving back in, Jonathan, because we're not just going back to Gundam. We are, for the first time in a long time, going back properly to the Universal Century of Gundam by taking a look at Mobile Suit Gundam MS Igloo and MS Igloo 2, the 9 episodes total of 3D CG Gundam made between 2004 and 2009, which that 2009 date sort of puts it right in our window of where we're at sort of chronologically with Gundam.
Yes, because we just finished Gundam 00.
Yep.
And we'll be moving on to Gundam Age, and this finished up right in that window. So we are talking about MS Igloo, which is, would you say, other than G-Savior, the most obscure thing we've covered?
Oh, yes. In terms of stuff we've covered, 100%. Yeah. I would say this is better. Better known is a loaded term. Maybe G-Savior is more infamous. This is more well-known, is Mobile Suit Gundam in MS Igloo. But yes, it's a more obscure kind of little pocket of Gundam. But I think we realized, well, if we're going to cover it, we have to cover it now. And it's also only 9 episodes, so we can squeeze that episode in real easy.
This is another one where you had seen it already.
Uh-huh.
It was new to me. Sort of. So if you people remember back on, I think, episode 6 of Weekly Suit Gundam, which is when we had finished the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and then we did an episode on the movie trilogy.
Yep.
But in that time, because of staggered recording and releasing, I had finished Mobile Suit Gundam and then gone on a fucking tear.
Yeah, you got Gundam fever. That really it was the fire from which the modern conception of what Weekly Suit Gundam was born.
Exactly.
This madness that you had conceived after we finished the original show.
Yes, and I watched all the 1 Year War stuff.
Yeah.
Not in chronological release order, just what was there. So I did Gundam the Origin, and I did War in the Pocket, and I did the 8th MS team.
Thunderbolt,
yeah. All of that stuff. I just watched everything. I was just devouring it, right? And then I did download, and I had it on my hard. I've had it on my hard drive this whole time, MS Igloo, and I started watching it, and then I stopped. And then we moved on to Zeta. That I will say was my initial reaction to Igloo back in the day was, I'm good.
Uh-huh.
Because, Sean, what maybe made younger Jonathan have that reaction to MS Igloo? What's conspicuously different about this one?
So MS Igloo, which I'll get into the full details a little bit, but just hit this piece. It started in 2004, and it is fully 3D CG animation. And we're not talking Pixar, right? This isn't like a big movie budget. And even if you were talking Pixar, that's early still.
Yes.
For like big movie, like 3D CG full productions. And it's entirely 3D CG. There's no 2D animation or what have you. It's all that. And it looks, I think, what can charitably be described as like a like off-budget rip-off of a PS2 Final Fantasy cutscene. If you can think of like the cutscenes in Final Fantasy X, which are gorgeous, like the full produced CG ones, beautiful, great cutscenes in that game. This is like if you took those and got like halfway done making them. That's what particularly all the human level stuff in MS Igloo looks like. Some of the mecha animation, the fight scene stuff can be okay.
In MS Igloo 1, MS Igloo 2 is better.
Yeah, MS Igloo 2 is much better in that regard. But MS Igloo 1, the human stuff is, which you get a lot of early on in episode 1, is rough to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because if you listen to the Weekly Stuff podcast, we were just talking about different Resident Evil games we've been playing.
Yeah.
And I've been playing some Resident Evil games from this era, like 2002, like Resident Evil 0. And it has those, full CGI movie cutscenes. They look better than this. It is a noticeably cheap production. And we're talking about MS Igloo 1 specifically here, because 2 is better in every fucking regard.
Yes.
MS Igloo 1, though, like, it is, you can tell it just had no budget because both the animation is just unbelievably cheap and stiff and bad, but also the music is the most noticeable thing to me because it's
like 2 or 3 tracks.
It's like 2 or 3 tracks, and it's also like, at no point in the history of Gundam has Gundam music sounded this cheap, sounded this low production value. It's like one guy with a synth from the 80s, maybe crapping out some tracks that aren't bad, but they sound like very rough demos.
Yeah, they're like musically it's fine for what it is, but it is like very noticeable that you have like here is the action song and here's like the sad song and here's like the exposition song, and that's about all they've got.
Yeah, through those 6 episodes. So like it is just stylistically the biggest hurdle to getting into MS Igloo is that there is no other Gundam thing that is this ugly to watch.
Yeah, other than G Savior, which is ugly in a very 90s TV movie way.
Yeah.
This is ugly in a mid-2000s cheap CG production way.
I will say, the CG with the Mobile Suit stuff is better than the CG stuff in G Savior.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's better written, it's better produced, it's better
yes.
acted. Like, all those things are still better than G Savior. Like, not to spoil if we do, like, lists and stuff and rankings for the second anniversary, but you can't really get much worse than G Savior as far as Gundam is concerned.
No. And I will say, if you want to give our first reactions here,
yeah,
I struggled through MS Igloo 1, which is 6 episodes. So there's 2 parts. There's the Hidden 1 Year War, which is the first 3 episodes. Then Apocalypse 0079, that's the second 3 episodes, and that's MS Igloo 1. I guess my number 1 reaction is there are 2 separate episodes I fell asleep during, and didn't feel super compelled to rewind and rewatch the parts I fell asleep during because it is basically Gundam Mad Libs. All 6 of the MS Igloo 1 episodes are the same story, but with a different, like, invention, suit, technology, and a different person who dies at the end.
Yeah.
The 6th episode is pretty good. It has a good ending. It has a solid ending. But, like, there is very little remarkable in those. I thought MS Igloo 2 was great.
Yes, I like MS Igloo 2 quite a bit.
And I actually think when we do our rankings, we need to separate them because there's no way I can rank these together.
I agree, yeah. Like, we squashed these together for this recording because it would be weird to do
2 episodes on MS Igloo.
Yeah, it'd be very excessive because they'd be 2 short episodes, one of which would be very negative and one of which would be pretty positive.
Yes. I would love the listener reaction if I came out with this and people said, "Where's Gundam Age?" And I said, "Don't worry, we have 1 more Igloo episode."
Yeah.
But no, we're getting to Age.
We're going to take about a month to watch through MS Igloo 2 and then give our impressions,
Yeah. No, but MS Igloo 2 is great. MS Igloo 2 is 2009. It's got vastly better CGI, much bigger budget. It's got a much more interesting story that is not nearly as formulaic or derivative. It's actually one of the most creative takes within the Gundam mythos I've seen. MS Igloo 2 is, like, I would argue, must watch for fans of, like, the 1 Year War stuff.
I agree.
Yeah. And we'll get there.
Yes.
But do you want to stick with the first one?
Yeah. We'll stick with the first one for now. And just to give my overall impressions is I do think I enjoyed MS Igloo 1 more on a second viewing, part of it is like going in knowing what it looked like, because the first time I watched it in the like sequential, because this, when I originally watched it, it would have been before I had seen Double O Gundam, because I think I had just watched these when they came up in like 2004 or whatever. So I think I maybe rolled off of See Destiny and then watched this. Which also like maybe describes a little bit of my mood watching it the first time, but not knowing anything about it. I don't even think I knew that it was 3D CG. I just knew there's like a Gundam thing I had. It came out 2004. It's some OVA something or other. Let me watch this, and then booting it up and being like, did I accidentally load up like the opening cutscene to the Ninja Gaiden Xbox version of Ninja Gaiden, which like the opening credits in particular look shockingly like the very beginning of the Xbox remake of Ninja Gaiden, with like the really shitty looking CG fire and the text on it. It's like, it's very that game. And yeah, so then I watched it and was so put off by the human animation, but me being me, I'm like, well, I gotta get through it. And I was like, well, it's the 6 episodes, and then there's this other one where we'll see if those 3 are good, and I powered through it. Very much a like, have to hold my nose while I'm watching this thing the first time I watched it. And then I remember particularly really liking MS Igloo 2 when I watched it the first time through. Rewatching MS Igloo 1, I can see more that I can kind of appreciate about it. Especially going in with some of the historical context on how it was made, which we'll talk about, made me like it a little bit more. And I do think if you are really into the 1 Year War stuff and like that side of the original Gundam, there are some interesting tidbits here and there. There's 1 or 2 episodes that I think are okay. But it is extremely formulaic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the animation isn't even my biggest problem with it. I got over that pretty quickly. It is I think they're all a full half hour.
Yes,
and
they're all too long.
None of them warrant that length. Yeah. They should all be like 15 fucking
minutes.
In
my memory, they were 15 minutes. I was sure they had to be, because I remembered that all of them were, you get introduced to some new experimental piece of tech, you get introduced to a pilot, they fly it, and then they die, and that's every single episode. And it's like, that can't possibly be 30 minutes. I mean, they're longer than a normal episode of Gundam by like 5 minutes.
Yeah, the only other OVA we've watched that pushes to 30 minutes is Stardust Memory. Even 8th MS Team and War in the Pocket run 24, that's kind of normal TV length. So, yeah, they're way too long. They're slow. They're just awkwardly paced. There's that kind of stuff bothers me even more than the animation. But there are definite moments here and there, which is what I think you're saying, that kind of like work and like elevate it. It's not without its merits.
Yes, it has merit. It's still better to me than G Savior, but
it's better than G Savior. I don't know if it's better than anything else.
Yeah. And then MS Igloo 2 is just like much better and is really interesting. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. But let's go over some of the history about how MS Igloo came about.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. It is definitely something that it took me a while to find this info. It's not particularly like accessible on English language internet, because there's not a lot written about MS Igloo on the English language internet. But digging around a little bit on the Japanese side of things, where MS Igloo, the original series, came from was Sunrise, which is part of Namco Bandai. Bandai has a museum in Japan, the Bandai Museum. And there was a big Gundam exhibit in 2004, and they were kind of planning for that, and they wanted to make an original video, something to be shown at this museum exhibit. And so they started sort of planning and drafting that out. And early on, one person that the producer for the series, Kawaguchi, brought on was Takashi Imanishi, who people might remember as he is one of the main directors. He's really the biggest director from Stardust Memory. That show had 2 directors, but he was kind of like the biggest creative force on that show, particularly for the second half of it. So they brought him on, along with like some other like Sunrise people and the kind of production crew, to sort of come up with what they wanted to do. And so they came up with this idea of, if it's going to be a museum thing and it's going to be shown in this museum, let's make something that is very niche for the fans. The kind of production that wouldn't get greenlit for a TV show, probably wouldn't even be greenlit for an original video like OVA release. And so they had the idea of, let's do 1 Year War stuff, but let's tell a 1 Year War story from the Zeon perspective, which at this point had never been done in animation. It had only been done in like novels and manga and that side of things, but there had never been a full like animated production of the Zeon perspective of things in the 1 Year War.
The closest would be War in the Pocket, but the main character of that isn't aligned with either side.
Yes, exactly. So, and even that's like off to the side in its own little pocket of the 1 Year War. Whereas here, their idea was, let's pick a couple of the pivotal events in the history of the 1 Year War and follow this group of people who are Zeon soldiers, who are like basically this experimental weapons division where they're experimenting on these different weapons, which I will say like is a smart premise given like what you see of Zeon in the original Gundam.
Yeah, I really like that.
Is like they have, particularly in that second half, it's just like a new fucking mobile suit or mobile armor or something every single episode. So I think that like, here's like this weird tank, here's this weird shit that they're experimenting on. It's a solid premise and a solid setup. And they originally had the idea of, like, let's try to do a movie or something that covers, like, the full extent of it. They quickly realized that's not going to be possible. Around this time, they also settled on, we'll do the 3D CG stuff, which is becoming more feasible for a production of this scale. It means that you kind of have, you can get away with having fewer people. So this is, because this is much cheaper than any other thing we have talked about. This has got to be by far the cheapest production. Even G Savior is a fucking movie. They had a full crew. This is like a relatively small group of 3D animators, like a composer, a director, two writers that worked across all 9 of these episodes. It's a pretty skeleton crew that worked on this for pretty cheap. And so they scaled down from the original idea of let's do a movie that does the whole thing to let's do like 3 episodes. The original 2 episodes kind of aired together. I'm really curious to know like in what format you saw these and like that. I can't find information about that. But basically episodes 1 and episode 2 would have been shown at the Bandai Museum starting July 19th, 2004. And then November 3rd, 2004 is when they showed the 3rd episode of that original 3 episodes of the Hidden 1 Year War. And people seem to have liked them enough for the producer of the series to decide, well, let's then do a home video release. And some of this information I do want to point out I found on the most early 2000s website ever, which is msigloo.net, Jonathan, if you want to appreciate.
Oh my God. This is giving me powerful flashbacks. Yeah. This is a very early 2000s website.
Yeah, which I have to assume also that Bandai must have or Sunrise has like a bot that like updates all their old like show specific websites, because there's like new advertisements for current Blu-rays and stuff on the site.
Yeah, because this would have just been re-released in the UC Gundam library. I have one of those, yeah.
Yeah, so I went around on this website to find out some of this information, and there are like interviews and stuff. Most of the interviews and things like that are more for like the mecha side of things. There is an interview with Hideaki Anno of Neon Genesis Evangelion fame, which is their sort of highlight, big interview that they have. Apparently Anno really likes MS Igloo, at least going by the interview on msigloo.net. I can't vouch for if that's his real opinion or if he's just sort of shilling for Gundam, but he's had nice things to say about it. But the producer's idea, actually, he credited this idea to Imanishi. It was like, we want to do a home video version. We still want to preserve some of like the limited edition appeal of what MS Igloo is, which I agree with, because it's also like, you gotta have something to spice it up, because I don't think a lot of people are really gonna be that interested in this thing. So they struck a deal with the Japanese convenience store Lawson's to sell an exclusive limited edition DVD of the first 2 episodes, and then eventually the 3rd episode only through Lawson's in the original release. And then obviously then later it's been collected in its own DVD set, in its own Blu-ray set, and in different collections like the most recent one. So it's like now you can get it in a million different ways, or you can just stream it on Amazon in Japan and stuff like that. But at the time, they kind of were precious a little bit about preserving some of the limited edition appeal of what it was as this kind of museum project. Then apparently that must have done well enough for them to then be able to make the second set of 3 episodes, which those were just released as OVAs in the same release model. I think it was like 1 episode per thing. That must have done then well enough for MS Igloo 2 to get greenlit. Again, there's like very little information I can find anywhere about like the decision-making process or like the sales numbers or anything. Fuck if I know. But obviously it did well enough for them to say, well, let's do another one. So they did MS Igloo 2, which also released in individual sets originally of like DVDs, 2008 to the last episode came out in 2009. And then eventually that also got collected in a bunch of different versions. But that's how it started. And watching particularly the first episode from the lens of, this was a thing that you went to go see the special new Gundam exhibit at the Bandai Museum, which always has like different new exhibits for Bandai type properties all the time in Japan, and that's how you watch this. I'm like, okay, like in that context, I can see I can envision myself being a Gundam fan in 2004, watching this at the museum exhibit, and not being blown away by it, but being like, oh, that's cool, because then you step outside and you see, here's like a cool, like, big model of a Zaku, and here's like concept art, and like, you know, you're sort of, it's one piece of the experience of engaging with one-year war stuff for Gundam. When you're just watching it on its own outside of that context, you're just like, what the fuck is this thing? Why does it even exist? Why do all the humans move through like 70 different emotions in like a single frame of animation somehow? Like their faces are so over animated. You're just like filled with like existential questions watching it when you don't have the context of, oh, this is like a small museum project that was like this weird experimental 3D CG thing for the fans. In that light, I'm like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, to quote Indiana Jones, it belongs in a museum.
Yes.
It is, especially those first three, because the first three, what they call the Hidden One-Year War, that makes so much more sense as something you would go to see at a museum and probably not be able to control which one exactly you would see.
Yeah.
Because that's how that's how the Ghibli Museum does it with their shorts. That's how if you go to museums in the US, like we have the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, they have different IMAX movies playing every day, and you can look it up ahead of time, but often you just go to the museum and be like, it's about polar bears, I'll go see that, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And I think it's like this, like you could watch any of those first three out of order. They are ordered chronologically through the One-Year War, but there's no like character continuity between those three. And so you could just watch one, and I think if you were at the museum in a Gundam mindset, having fun, you went in, and I don't know how they showed this, whether it was in a screening space or whatever, and you watch it, I think you would probably have a pretty good time with it, and you probably wouldn't even be worrying about the animation style all that much, right? Because it would be it's a literal novelty.
Yes.
At the museum. And then the Apocalypse 0079 stuff, which moved to just an OVA, is where they start bringing in a little more continuity. They try fleshing out the characters a little more. Episode 6 is very much a wrap-up for this cast and all of that. And I think, if anything, that works even less for me because it's just so thin that trying to build on it doesn't work. I think the Hidden One-Year War set of episodes is stronger just because it kind of is what it is. But yeah, it's in a museum setting, makes total sense. MS Igloo 2 did a much better job of adapting to the OVA format, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, you know, I think this is good context, because I think if you sat down to watch this and like binge it or whatever like you would any other Gundam series, it's just not gonna work, and it's just knowing what it was originally made for makes you go, okay, and I feel like a lot more charitable towards it.
Yes.
Because I think for what it set out to do with that museum sense, it does that pretty well. I mean, it's for like an in the weeds Gundam story that sort of focuses on things that you could then go explore outside in the museum space. It's very good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's I think, and especially when in the original context in 2004, where you don't quite have as much of what we have now, right? Like the origin doesn't exist, right? You've never seen the Battle of Loom animated in any form whatsoever, right?
Yes.
Like, because we've both seen the Battle of Loom episode of the origin.
Holy fuck,
it's amazing, and it's like it blows this out of the water. But like when you haven't seen a lot of like big spin-off stuff from the One-Year War. You have the couple of the OVA things, but that's it. Like that, I think there's a higher degree of novelty to this, especially in that museum setting, and like there are fun little treats there, because it is like definitely it's the kind of thing where if you had not seen the original Mobile Suit Gundam and really cared about the original Mobile Suit Gundam and the events and plot and the history in the world that builds up, this would be fucking gobbledygook to you. Like, you'd have, there's like, it's very light on plot, but what plot is there leans so heavily on you, on someone being able to say the Battle of Loom, and you immediately being like, oh, well, that is the first battle in the One-Year War that like really separated the sides of the Zeon and the Earth Federation, where the Zeons brought in their Zakus and like changed the face of warfare with mobile suits by the first appearance of mobile suits on any battlefield in the history of modern warfare. It's like you have to be able to produce that sentence in order for that episode to do anything for you at all.
Right, and it's all stuff that, especially in 2004, would have just been covered in Tomino's original novelization. Like,
exactly.
And then I assume some data books and stuff after that. But it's his novel that lays down all that history that has now kind of become gospel and the origin fleshed out and all of that stuff. But it's sort of hitting... It's Apocalypse 0079 gets into the events of the TV show and is probably more accessible on that level, which I think is kind of funny. But yeah, the first one I was like, man, this is rewarding all of my in-depth Gundam knowledge with the Battle of Loom and like, oh, this is only March of the 1 year war, so the other side doesn't have mobile suits yet, blah, 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 you know?
Yes.
Which is also, I think, a slightly weird decision for what they choose to do of, like, it's a story about the crew dying and suffering every single time, which at this point in the war doesn't fully make sense because Zeon was in command at this point, but now I sound like a super nerd, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah. So let's just dive into some of MS Igloo, the Hidden 1 Year War. Let's talk about the first episode, The Vanishing Serpent of Loom. I will say all the episode titles are very good.
They're phenomenal episodes.
Both in Japanese and the official English translations are great titles. And we've talked about the animation being bad, but we need to talk about it a little bit in depth, particularly with the human stuff, because it is like the first 5 minutes or so of episode 1 is just that. Like you have to wait a little bit before you get any mobile suit stuff at all.
Yeah.
And it is truly terrible. Like it is like it is that like horrifying like it is the kind of thing for which the phrase the uncanny valley was invented.
Yep.
Was like the thing of nightmares of it's like very primitive motion capture data that is supplemented by very hyperactive overdone hand animation to sort of cover up the bad motion capture they have, as well as I'm assuming there's no like facial capture type thing going on at all. That's all looks like hand animated in this very like, we have to very desperately try to find some ways to make these plastic dolls emote. So let's have their eyebrows move like 100 different directions and their eyes freak out and their mouths are doing scary things.
The faces are the worst part because the faces are extremely static except for the limited parts that move.
Yeah.
And the parts that move weirdly. Like, and this actually even continues into MS Igloo 2, is mouth movements. Like the mouth matching to the voices is bad. It's like, it's really mechanical. It looks like there's maybe some kind of algorithm doing it. I don't know, but it does not like... You know, one of the things that I think is a genuine virtue of anime generally is that the lip flaps are very simple, and in Japan they don't give a shit about how much it matches to the voice. And it's just, as an anime viewer, it's something that like English dubs always get wrong, is they try to go too close to the lip flaps, and it's like, they don't care in Japan, why do you care?
Yeah.
Like, just voice it and emote, and we all buy it, and that's nice. It's like they're trying to be too exact. And it does not look like a human ever moves their mouth. And I think you're picking up more on like the eyebrows and eyes and stuff, and I agree 100%. But what I picked up on was just that the talking looks wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where you look at their faces animate, and it's like you can see the math. Right, you can see
exactly.
This muscle, like which was at a 0, is now at a 1, so it pulls this like piece this way, and yeah, like it's so much of like I think the lips are very hyperactive. It has this thing of where like, you know, the human like mouth, you don't have muscles that are like between your nose and your upper lip. Like there are no muscles there, so your upper lip can't pull itself up. But you get this all the time, particularly in old CG stuff with humans. And you can even get in like more modern stuff when they fuck it up, is you'll have that like upper lip starts like moving in a way that's not humanly possible because that's not how mouths move. And that's very much what they do here, is you have all of the lips move and animate instead of just like the lower part of the mouth and the jaw and that. And so that makes all of the mouth movements completely inhuman. It's impossible for a human to move the mouth the way that they're moving it. And then also, yes, and then even the movements that are things that humans could do with like the jaw and the lower lip are like way too overdone. Like everything is like excessive. It's so excessive because it feels like they don't have the ability to tone it and dial it in, because if they don't over animate it, they probably like looks like it's not animated at all. Like they can't get the nuance.
Exactly, yeah. So it is rough. There's basically no texture on faces.
Yeah.
Or like on some characters, like there's the captain of the ship, he's got some texture going on, but it is very flat and placid. It's the kind of stuff where you look at it and you go like, oh, right, this is why Pixar made their first movie about plastic toys.
Yes.
Which is still one of the smartest things in the history of animation, is just like, lean into it, guys, right? And they did. And you're like, yeah, this doesn't look right. And yeah, when they're just in mobile suits and you're out on the battlefield, I still don't think it's perfect. Like, I think they have a specific issue with like weight of movement. But like when it is just the people talking, it is it is very hard to invest in the way that I think if you took these exact same scripts and it was a manga or a traditional anime, I would enjoy it quite a bit more just because that distantation effect would not be there.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing that really exacerbates it is that the tone of this show is so fucking serious. It's so heavy.
It's dour.
Intense. Like, yeah, every episode is about, like, the main character dying, and you know that. Like, the main character of the episode, right? Because the cast of the ship, the Jotunheim, are, like, very disposable characters. It's like, I'm the guy who writes the reports. I'm the lady who's, like, supposed to be very strict. And I'm the captain who I can never understand what emotion the captain is experiencing because I can't tell what his face is doing. It never reads to me as, like, an emotion. Outside of, like, the last episode is the only time that character, I think, has, like, emotions that I understand, like, what is trying to be expressed through that character. But each episode has their pilot of whatever the new machine is, and you know as soon as they're introduced, even when you don't know that's the premise of the show, you can tell that, oh, this is going to be about this dude dying tragically on the battlefield, and then, like, blonde dude who's your main character.
Oliver May,
he is going to have some very solemn narration over the end of it, where he's going to say Universal Century 0079, and then blah, 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 about the nature of war and life and death. And it's like, it's so intensely self-serious, which is fine. Like, lots of Gundam is very serious because it's about war, but it is way over serious. And I'll talk about this particularly. I think it can be a problem with the endings of episode 2 and 3 try to go too far and kind of ruin the point of the episodes. But then also it is like so hard to buy into the seriousness when you then have crazy fucking PS2 CG man like trying to be sad or angry or something, and you can't tell what's going on because the animation is so bad. It is really hard to get invested in the self-seriousness of it when the animation's kicking you out of it every single second.
Like, honestly, if they wanted to do a foray into 3D CGI at this time with this budget, they should have done SD Gundam.
Yes.
Made a couple
which, to be fair, they did. Like, that is, like, either around this time or a little bit after that is when they would start doing CG SD Gundam shows.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was just going to think, like, the deformities, and you could make it shorter, and all of that would just, like, you would buy into that reality so much more. But yes, this is Gundam at, like, kind of its most dour in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's very, very intensely self-serious. So, episode 1, we have the Battle of Loom, and the weapon for that episode is a giant cannon called the Jorungand, named after, there's a lot of Norse stuff in here, so that's the world serpent in Norse mythology. The ship they're on is the Jotunheim, and so you have the, like, weapons specialist, gunnery sergeant dude, who is the guy who mans this cannon. And I do think this episode, as a, like, curio in Gundam, I like the way it's positioned as this is before Zaku's have been introduced as a weapon on the battlefield, and this experimental weapons team is there to sort of test this giant fucking railgun cannon thing that's like an anti-ship weapon. And the way that all that is portrayed at the beginning of the Battle of Loom, all of our main characters are commenting on, like, well, why are our ships, like, pulled so back, right? Like Zeon is so outnumbered. It doesn't make sense for the tactics for this battle to be, let's have our ships like old school, 18th century musket volleys or something. We're just, like, sat on this line shooting across at each other. The Earth Federation has so many more ships. They're going to win with that strategy. We need to be engaged in close combat, and then let's, like, fire our gun, and they're not giving us the data we need. But, like, of course they don't have the data they need because the gun sucks because Minovsky particles are a thing, right? Like, you need a really complex set of data to fire a long-range cannon in space in a battlefield full of Minovsky particles where you don't have good radar, you can't lock onto anything. Like, this is why mobile suits are a weapon in Gundam. So it's like they have this big cannon that's basically useless. They're like, what the fuck is even going on? And that's when a red Zaku flies in. You don't have, and I like that they don't have Char speak at all. You don't have Shuji Keita. It's just like he signals them with the Zaku Eye. That's basically like, hey, we're taking command of this battlefield. Like, you stay back here and do fucking whatever. Like, we're going in. Because the tactic is not, let's sit back and have the big cannon shoot. We're going to fly the Zakus in and use them as our close range weapons. And that's why Zeon wins the Battle of Loom. And that, like, as its own pocket standalone story. Like, if they had never made any more of this, I think it would be, like, an interest, especially as a museum curio, it would be pretty cool. And even as its own thing for the fans, I'm like, that's a cool story to tell. Of, here is the end of this old era of weapons that, like, where people thought that it was going to go this one direction. It's all going to be about big, long-range, really high-precision cannons, but that's not how it went. Instead, the mobile suits came in, and that's what begins mobile suits and what we think of as like the kind of combat we see in Gundam. That's a cool story. Absolutely,
and I think this first episode is solid. It's a good one. It might be the most enjoyable just because there's no formula yet.
Yes,
it has that positioning. It like. I think you buy into the low stakes of it all more because the specific point is that they are useless now, you know? Whereas in some other ones, I think they try to make you buy into, like, what they're trying to achieve here more in a way that's like, I know you didn't achieve anything because I've seen Gundam, you know? Like, this is something like Thunderbolt does really well that this show does not do well. So, but this first one is solid, and I think the plasma cannon, the Jormungand, is a cool design too in terms of mech stuff.
I think it's like a solid premise. It's executed fine within the means of what they had outside of the terrible like human animation stuff. It's like when I watched it again, I was like, you know what? Maybe I was too harsh on MS IGLOO. Like this is okay if you can get past the animation stuff. It's like an interesting perspective. And then I think it starts losing that pretty quickly with once you get to episode 2. Episode 2 is the one with the tank Howl stained in dusk, which is like fine on the face of it. I like the idea of, and we will get in MS IGLOO 2 a much, 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 much better version of this story because it is actually what the story feels like it's supposed to be, where it's tanks versus like mobile suit stuff. So here you have, it is very like, it feels like, because it's the same team made MS IGLOO 2, it feels like maybe they realized it kind of fucked up with like how excessive the setup is for episode 2 of this, that they're like, when they did episode 2 of MS IGLOO 2, it's like, let's do the same idea because it's a good idea, tanks versus mobile suits, but have it like make sense.
Right.
Because for the episode to work, one thing is it's Xeon guys, you have your Xeon test pilot in the Hill Digger or whatever it's called. Hildolfer, which is your experimental tank thingy. And he has to fight Zaku's because the Earth Federation doesn't have mobile suits yet. This is like a little bit before the events of Mobile Suit Gundam actually happened, the TV show. So there are no gyms, like there's no fucking mobile suits that the Earth Federation has, so they have to fight Zaku's, which already like makes it like, I think it kind of hurts the whole premise of the episode.
It's just confusing. Like I rewound at one point and be like, wait, why? I couldn't figure it out, and I had to like look it up. Like, okay, the Federation stole these Zaku's, and that's why they're fighting them. And it's like, it's not well enough communicated. It's just very confusing.
And for a series that's mostly just about getting to the fight scene where you have the cool experimental thing fight something, like it's too excessive of a setup. And then my biggest problem with this is that about halfway through the fight, the guy in the tank transforms and you find out, oh, it's not really a tank. It's basically like a mobile armor, only instead of a mobile armor on land, right? Instead of it being a big ship thing that has mobile suit type elements like arms and legs, instead is like a tank, but it's basically like a gun tank. It's got like an upper body and arms and stuff. And it like handily takes out basically the Zaku's. The guy like, it's sort of like he takes out I think like 4 or 5 Zaku's and then dies at the end. And it's like, well, this is a hugely effective weapon, clearly. Yeah. Like, it is so much more impressive than a Zaku, and that completely ruins the point of the episode. Like, the whole concept should be, hey, we have this, like, tank that's this experimental tank, but it's based on, like, what we understand tanks to be. It's not a mobile suit. And then I feel like in order to make it cool, they then turn it into this mobile suit thing, and you lose the entire, like melancholy tone that episode 1 I think gets pretty well, which is this like these people have dedicated their lives to building this kind of technology, and now it's just totally obsolete because it's the wrong technology for the wrong time, which I think is an interesting military fiction story to tell. And then that's not at all what the story ends up feeling like. It ends up feeling like, well, why don't the Zeons just make way more of these? Because these seem really fucking good.
Right. I liked episode 3, I will say. Dance of the Orbital Ghosts. This one is about the Zuda mobile suit, which is it was a prototype that was in development alongside the Zaku, but the Zaku was like the company that made it, the Zeonic, had like more ins with the government, and so it got the Zaku. And so you have the pilot in that episode was one of the original test pilots of the Zuda, and so he's excited to like pilot it again. And like they've given a couple of Zudas to the Jotunheim just to like, here, fuck off with these.
Yeah.
And they wind up having this battle where the big thing at the end, the way the character Duval is his name, wins is just by flying the Zuda fast enough around like the Earth to the point where the GMs chasing him like run out of fuel and burn up in orbit, and then he does too. And like, it should be like a 15-minute story max, and the biggest weakness of this one is it's the full fucking half hour, and there's nowhere near enough story for it. But the basic outline of that, I think, works. I like this one.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think it does have... I think one thing it has a lot better than the other episodes is I think it's got more of a story for the pilot character.
Yes.
Which is a big problem with episode 2 and 4, because it will just... it's episode 1 of Apocalypse 0079, but it's just episode 4, really.
Right.
Like, both of those, the pilot just is sort of very generic military dude. There's not much of a story to them. Yeah, Jean-Luc Duval.
Great name.
Yeah, very good. Like, Will, we just looked up what's the character from Star Trek and what's an actor you can name. Jean-Luc Picard and Robert Duvall. Okay, let's go for it. Jean-Luc Duval.
That's what I mean by the Mad Libs thing.
Exactly. And so his whole story of he was the pilot of the Zuda, and he really believes in this mobile suit, and then he feels like he was robbed. And so then part of the plot is that he's hiding the fact that the EMS is like 01 or whatever originally was the Zuda, which is like the original model of the Zuda, had this critical failure of it would explode if you flew too fast. And now it's the EMS 10 Zuda, but at the beginning of the episode, one of the pilots dies because he flies too fast and it explodes, and our main character, Oliver May, discovers that, well, all they did was change the numbering. They didn't actually redesign it in any way. Like, that's a good setup. I think it has a similar problem to episode 2, though, with the ending, where the ending doesn't make sense to me, where the GMs and the Zuda both blow up for the same reason. Well, then the Zuda doesn't have a critical flaw, because anything would blow up in these circumstances. Like, what? Right. Like, it sort of feels like this. I like the idea of because it's very, you can see parallels in actual military history of that kind of thing happening. But it feels like, well, then the thing should either be like, well, the GMs aren't fast enough because they have safety mechanisms installed that the Zuda doesn't, or something like that. But the GMs blowing up is like a cooler way to resolve the episode, but it feels like it kind of robs a little bit of what the premise of the thing is. When the whole series is really about these experimental weapons, it like really hurts what they have when they can't like actually commit fully to that bit to me.
Oh, 100%. I very much agree with that. But, take what you can get. Yeah,
you take what you get. It is one of the better episodes, even with those problems.
Because I will say, Apocalypse 0079 was the real slog for me. I almost didn't get through this. I do not like any of these three, other than some parts in the 3rd/6th episode. But those first two are rough, I thought.
Yeah, so episode 4, you have In the Skies of Jaburo, I Saw the Sea. Again, that's a great title. Like, that's a great title, or like the great first line of a poem that a Xeon pilot writes. In the Skies of Jaburo, I Saw the Sea. Yeah, this is just, it's so generic. Like, it's basically just episode 2, only it's like a guy who's like, it feels like they really wanted it to be a naval episode, but it was probably harder to animate these things underwater, so they just made it in the sky. Like, that's what it feels like to me. Of like,
because it's all Zagoks and all that. There is one cool idea in it, which is they have a Zagok. Isn't this the one where they would dive upside down and then shoot back up?
Uh-huh.
That's cool. It's not 30 minutes
exactly.
cool.
It's a cool beat in the middle of the episode in like the big action scene. Yeah.
Right.
But it doesn't justify the entire story.
No.
Yeah. It just feels like would have been cool to have done an aquatic mobile suit thing, but it would have been too hard to do it in CG. So fuck it.
This is 2004. Pixar is first figuring out how to do water at this time for Finding Nemo. These guys aren't going to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one's very much whatever. Then you have Cross the Path of Light, where this is the first time they at least change up a little bit of the formula by having the experimental pilot be a character related to our main cast. So it is like the younger brother of very strict military lady whose name is Monique Cadillac, which is a good name. It's a very good name, Monique Cadillac. And I do like the idea of this. Again, it's not a 30-minute episode idea, but that at this point, the Zeons are out of like good mobile suit things and like experimental weapons. So now they have these like mobile pods called the Augos or the Augs that are basically like the response to the Earth Federation's Ball mobile pod, which at this point the Earth Federation has had GMs for like 2 months in the war. Because at this point we're like after the Battle of Solomon. They jump really far to like.
This
right
is
before
Abaoku is what's happening.
This
here.
is like right before Abaoku is this episode. Then Abaoku is the last episode.
Yeah.
And I like that idea of here, like we have like these like anti-ball weapons at the point where it's like totally outdated, but let's just throw random cadets and stuff at this problem. I think it like is a good premise. It just is like too much episode for that premise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of dull.
Yeah.
And it's a space where like I always think like if you're gonna do other Gundam stories around like Abaoku and like that stuff, like you really need to justify what you're doing there.
Yeah.
And I don't think they really. I think episode 6 does because they make it about a retreat.
Yeah.
And that's great. But this one really doesn't. This is one that like Thunderbolt does really well because Thunderbolt goes to Abaoku, but does it very specifically as a denouement for one of the main characters and as an introduction to the next story arc as something that's happening on the side while everyone else is distracted. So it's very good at knowing like we can't actually affect the outcome here because Abaoku really was about Amuro and Char.
Yeah.
You know? So like let's not fuck with that. This one just like I don't care.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree. It does introduce, if you thought that the Nazi stuff with the Zeons was subtle, they do, like, make sure you really get it with Eric Kruger, who's the character who shows up here, who is, he's wearing, just full on an SS uniform. And he's got, like, the black, like, leather coat, and he's got the black hat, and he's got, like, a big menacing black glove that he tightens every time he says anything.
Yep, it's a sound effect that, like, they clearly got from an audio library that I probably have access to, too, and they use it over and over again. No, this guy looks like someone Indiana Jones would punch in the face.
Yeah, it's very funny to me, especially when, like, they literally just name drop Hitler in the original Gundam. You don't need to like make the Nazi stuff more overt than that. They just say Hitler in the original show. You could just kind of move on from that.
Which also just like, I think is so episode 6.
Yeah.
Has interesting stuff. It becomes, it's too long like all of these, but it winds up becoming about this tactical retreat where like halfway through the episode. So first off, all of our main characters are sent out to fight up against their wishes, basically.
Yeah.
And Oliver May goes out in the Big Rang mobile armor, which is a good name.
Yeah.
And then like halfway through they realize, oh fuck, we lost. Everyone's fleeing. And so what the 603rd decides to do is to hold a position so that there's an escape route for the forces of Zeon. That's great. And that's a good premise for an episode. And then, of course, all your characters start dying, and it feels like, okay, this is the natural conclusion of this very formulaic series where for 5 episodes the main thing has died. Now we'll have all our main characters die to protect this retreat.
Because I do think it is, if you have your formula, a good twist on the formula is in the last episode, you had the pilot die every single episode. Now the pilot's the main character. Oh, shit.
Yes. But then they choose to have a happy ending where they all live.
Yeah.
And especially if you've leaned into the Nazi stuff, no, because then it winds up being like the bravery of the Zeon soldiers. And it's like, this is getting a little bit like American Civil War Noble South stuff. Like, just let them have died. I honestly would have had a much stronger opinion on this whole run of MS Igloo if it had the right ending. And instead it has a weirdly hopeful ending, which it's just not supposed to, clearly. You know?
It's just very bizarre, because I didn't, in my memory, all the characters died at the end.
Yeah.
Because I was like, because it's like the perfect opportunity. It's, nobody gives a shit about the characters of MS Igloo, so you can kill them off and like...
It's the one way to make me care about them.
Exactly. Like, right, like you don't want to kill off Amuro at the end of First Gundam, in the TV show at least. Like, or at least that's a hard choice to make, because audiences like Amuro, they don't want to see him die, and you're happy when you think he might have died and then he actually escapes. That's great. When it's a group of characters you don't give a shit about and you think they died, you're like, you know what? At the very least, they sacrificed their lives for what they believed in or whatever, and you can think on them as like they use themselves up in the narrative effectively, and then they come back and then you're like, well, why? Like, I don't care. But it would be like if, I don't like Star Wars Rogue One very much, but if Star Wars Rogue One somehow ended with all those characters living, even though the whole premise is that they're all going to die at the end of the movie, it would that would be one of the fucking worst Hollywood movies ever. Like, it would be so intolerably bad. And that's kind of what this ending is it's the whole premise is it's about them all dying at the end, and then somehow, utterly inexplicably, there's not even an attempt at some explanation about how they survived that battle.
You watch Oliver May blow up in his big... I guess the idea is that he ejected and someone caught him, but it doesn't fit. And it's just like, yeah, because Oliver May is not a super compelling protagonist. He's mostly just there for the ending narrations. But like, then you put him against his will in the big ring. He doesn't want to be there. Over the course of that episode, he does decide, like, fuck it, I'm going to fight, I'm going to die to protect this retreat because this is what it has come to. That's the most compelling he is through the whole series.
Yes. Because it's such a good idea for the story they've told. You know, as clumsy as they've been throughout, like, the thing of his role is to sit in the chair and launch the observation pods, and his whole thing is, like, he sees the lives of these pilots and watches them as they, like, burn out like brilliant candles. And then he is the one who has to sit in the pilot seat and then come to understand what it's like not to be the person watching someone sacrifice their life, but to be the person actually making that decision to sacrifice themselves.
Yes.
That's a really compelling story. Not that they would have executed it. It would have been brilliant if they had followed through on it, but it would have been a fucking story if they had followed through on it, and I would have had a lot more respect for MS Igloo 1 if they had committed to it.
Now I'm imagining, you know how Rogue One, it ends with Felicity Jones and Diego Luna like hugging as the nuclear explosion comes towards them. And I'm imagining like that happens, and then it's in space and there's a Gundam holding them in their hand. It's like, how'd she get out of there? Oh fuck it, we don't need to know. No, it's it's, you know, MS Igloo definitely ends on a whimper. But then you get MS Igloo 2.
Before we move on to MS Igloo 2, there's one thing I want to talk about really quick about one that I realized we went over, or we just kind of skipped over. I hate every scene that Oliver May has with the weird Nazi dude who gives him the instructions.
Right.
Those scenes are so weird. They feel like they're out of a different TV show. The way the Nazi dude is written, everything he frames is in some convoluted metaphor that doesn't really make sense. He like talks super cryptically for reasons you can't quite understand. The lighting is so harshly like burnt orange in every single frame. You can barely see what's even in the scene, even though it's just two dudes in an office talking. I never really understand like where they are, how Oliver May's even getting there in the midst of some of the shit that's going on. And I just always found those scenes very funny in this very so bad it's good kind of way.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, I already talked about the fucking glove sound effect we get over and over. Just like, oh my god. Because it's, again, like, every aspect of this is so cheap, including the sound design. Like, we talk about the music, but there's not actually that many sound effects.
Yeah.
Like, you can, like, it's the kind of thing where you can like, see the timeline in Final Cut in your head of, like, where they put each sound effect.
They very much just went to the Sunrise library of sound effects and pulled out a couple of things and just used them for the whole run.
Yeah. But, yeah. You know, at least we got a character named Monique Cadillac, and that's pretty good. So I will give it that.
And the other thing I'll say really quick, just, you know, because this came up in my research, is there is a reason why this character survived, because in like 2012, Imanishi, the director, wrote a manga adaptation of 0083 Stardust Memory, the other thing he directed, and in that manga they show that it's this crew are the guys who make Annabelle Gatto's like big crazy mobile suit he has at the end of Stardust Memory.
I've heard that manga's pretty good. I haven't read it.
It's probably fine, but I found that very funny. That like there's he like Oliver May shows up in like 2 pages of that manga. At least as far as I can tell, that's all he appears in. But that's why they had to live, Jonathan, in order to make Annabelle Gatto's giant mobile suit. It's filled in that plot hole from Stardust Memory.
You know, I like Annabelle Gatto enough that I'll give it to him.
Yeah.
You know, he's got to have a crew behind him. But all right. Can we talk about the good stuff now?
Yeah, now let's talk about MS Igloo 2 Gravity Front.
Literally every possible dimension is better.
Yes.
Down to the title treatment. MS Igloo 1 has this weird font where they go, it's all lowercase except for the L, and it's the same font that L in Death Note uses for his L.
Yes.
And so the L in Igloo is the L from Death Note, which is just fucking... And I know it's just a common font that's on computers, but like, given that Death Note was already, I think, serializing in Jump at this time, it's very funny to me.
Yes. And again, it's very much the opening cutscene from Ninja Gaiden. Like, it's that font, it's the bad CG fire, it's like all of that, the self-seriousness, it's just that cutscene.
But what Gravity Front does is it's the cool like military font, MS Igloo 2, and then it does this like big like title treatment of Gravity Front with like really cool looking kanji, and it looks like a proper like movie. There's just
Yuryoku Sensen.
Really cool. It just looks really cool. It's just like, it's very simple, but it's just something that right away you go, okay, this has some style to it, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a really different series.
Yeah.
I mean, one, the animation just right off the bat, because it starts with this scene sort of summarizing like the state of the war, because now we're on the Earth side, the Federation forces, and this is all Earth-based stories, right?
Yes, and episodes 1 and 2 are from before Mobile Suit Gundam starts, and then episode 3 is during Odessa Day.
Right. So you see like an actual battlefield in like the opening narration, and you see just like the number of assets on screen and the movement, and you see a mobile suit, a Zaku doing its thing, and right away you're like, oh my god, this looks like 7 times as expensive. Yeah. It's not the best animation in the world. There's nothing groundbreaking about it, but it's good. I will give it.
It's like it's good enough. It like gets what it needs to get. It like conveys the human emotion stuff. Can still be awkward, but But I never had a moment where I was looking at a character on screen and I couldn't tell what emotion they were trying to express. It's like the facial expressions are like clear and readable. The mobile suits have weight to them. Like it is good enough animation that it conveys what it's trying to convey.
And I think for all 3 stories they tell in this series, being CGI in 3D space it fits in a way where the first 6 of MS Igloo 1 I could imagine in manga form, I could imagine in 2D animation, whatever. I could imagine them in fucking slideshows. But like this really does feel like it needs to be CGI because of the way it is this intensely boots on the ground, grounded, literally like eye-level military storytelling. And so it's about like movement in space, and it's about staring up at a Zaku as it points a gun at you, and all this stuff that like 3-dimensionality, that sort of cinematic quality really matters here.
I agree, yeah. There's a shot near the beginning of episode 2 where a Zaku points its gun barrel at the camera, and the way they use depth of field to communicate the immense size of this thing, right? Because a human pointing a gun at a camera, depth of field, unless you had it dialed in a specific way, would not kick in at all. Like here, it's like a fucking mountain's pointing a gun at you, right? So it's like the things that are far away, its head, look blurrier in like this way that's like very distinct and drastic. And those are the kinds of things that like you could try to replicate that in 2D animation, but it would look very weird. Here it's like a very natural way to communicate the size and scale of what's happening from a human perspective.
Yeah, if you guys listened to our bonus episodes on Kimetsu no Yaiba, I gave a little breakdown of this film theory concept by a guy named Thomas Lamar of the cinematic versus the animatic, which is his way of theorizing what like anime does with space versus like 3D live action CGI stuff. And I think, and Kimetsu plays with that because it uses sort of both. But I think this show very much falls into the more, it's the cinematic style. And I don't mean cinematic in the way we say like Uncharted is cinematic because it's expensive and has movie star looking people. I mean that it's like the way it uses space is different and makes sense for these stories. And so, like, I like that it is in this style. Again, it is not the most groundbreaking animation, but it is perfectly fine, and the direction is really strong in these 3. And I actually think the direction in the first 6 is pretty good on a raw level. Like, I think if I were looking at the storyboards of those first 6 episodes, I would say they're pretty good on that level. It's just, then they execute it and it doesn't work. But like this is very, very solid. In the way, if this is the same director as Stardust Memory, that doesn't surprise me at all. Very, very solid director.
Exactly, yeah. Because especially like it does remind me of some of the better stuff from like the first couple episodes of Stardust Memory, or particularly Judoku Sensen or Gravity Friend. Like it reminds me of it's like a whole series made out of that one moment from the end of that one episode of Stardust Memory where the like captain's mobile suit explodes from that like one thing that went wrong at the very end of the episode. Like that idea and that conceptualization of Gundam as a franchise and these mobile suits as machines, that feels like that's the spark that this series is born from.
Absolutely. As well as some weird mystical Shinigami death stuff.
It's so good.
It's so good.
Yeah. So one major change they make with MS Igloo 2 is that they abandoned the idea of having a consistent cast across the episodes. Each episode is totally standalone.
Which is what it always should have been.
Yeah. And again, like also originally as they were released, each episode was just released as its own thing. Like you bought them individually on its original release schedule. But the one thing that sort of ties all 3 episodes together outside of their Earth Federation stories and that kind of stuff is you have this ghostly apparition of this woman who is the god of death, or Shinigami as they say in the show, And she sort of seems to haunt one character in each of the episodes. She haunts the main character in episode 1 and 3, and she haunts like the Ahab character, who's not like your POV character, but one of the main characters in episode 2. And so it's got this, that's where it gets a lot of like this, a similar heavy tone as MS Igloo 1, but it's a little bit more intentionally pulpy as it's framed in 2, which I think works so much better tonally. It's inherently ridiculous. Like, you're not meant to understand it literally. I don't think you're supposed to like go add to a Gundam wiki somewhere that there's a ghostly shadow ghost god of death lady who is a part of like the Gundam fiction or whatever. It is this like narrative device meant to represent the tone and feeling and the oppressive like violence and death that is ever present in these like really, particularly for episodes 1 and 2, really one-sided conflicts that the Earth Federation is just getting brutalized because they're so far behind technologically.
It's this like, it's almost like German expressionist like literalization of what's going on in the mind. It also, I think, works in this milieu because like you hear about this like with like battlefield and soldier superstitions all the time in naval and military fiction, and it's something that Gundam doesn't do a ton, but it actually feels like like they take it to a certain nth degree in this show, but it is that kind of thing where like, you know, the spirit of the battlefield or something like that you'll get in some stories fits here a lot.
Yeah, it also, like, I think, is a thing that I think I would roll my eyes at a lot more if it was a 2D animated production, whereas the 3D stuff, it kind of, the otherworldly uncanniness of inherently to the 3D CG stuff they do lands a lot better for me. Like, I think the best looking 3D CG character is this ghost lady because of how unrealistic she is in terms of her, like, lighting and stuff like that.
There's some gorgeous shots with her. Like, I mean, I'm just looking at ones like I took while watching of like sunsets and like things around her, and like these eerie. There's one where she's like under the moon and it's all green and fucked up. There's some really cool surreal imagery they do.
Yeah, that feels really novel because Gundam has not done it before, and so it's like it's something that's really sets MS Igloo 2 apart to me. As you have this crazy Shinigami lady in all the
who
episodes.
is voiced by Kikuko Inoue, who we have seen before as Aina Sahalin in 8th MS Team.
Yes, and Kira's mom in very, very briefly in Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny, because she is the mom in every other anime.
Yes, I do love on her Wikipedia page it says, Inoue tends to play the perfect girlfriend or motherly role in miniseries, which is funny for her role in this show. She also plays the main character of episode 3, Arlene, and so you have the same voice. There's some really cool stuff there. It's a really good performance, though. I mean, it's probably the most notable performance in these 9 episodes.
Yes. You do get a very brief, almost like cameo-esque appearance of Akio Otsuka as the White Ogre in episode 2 that I appreciate.
That was Akio Otsuka?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was, and then in the back of my head I went, they didn't pay for Akio Otsuka. But no, they did. Awesome. Okay, yeah.
That's I mean,
really
he
cool.
had already been in Stardust Memory at this point, so I'm assuming that's probably how that ended up coming
Well, I don't mean that like Gundam wouldn't. I meant MS Igloo wouldn't.
yes.
But actually MS Igloo 2 has more recognizable actors all around. If you
and I mean, it's the same director as Stardust Memory, so I'm assuming that connection is where he probably asked.
It's very good. Okay, yeah. Anything Akio Otsuka is in, I will like. So this is good. Yeah. But let's break down the individual episodes. The first one is
Shoot at That Death,
which is great. Well, it's specifically Shinigami.
Yes, it should be shoot at the Death God or Shoot at the Shinigami.
Yeah. But Shoot at That Death is almost a better like bad English title.
Yeah, that's a very good like grindhouse movie title, basically.
Now I want like Robert Rodriguez to make that movie and put it in theaters. Yes. So this one is about Lieutenant Ben Barbary. Mwah.
Very good. Particularly when you say it in Japanese, it is just the best like American Japanese name. I love it so much.
And this is my favorite of these 3.
Yes, yeah. This was the one where it feels like they had the idea for this episode and they're like, we need to come up with a way to make this because it's such a good idea. And it's like, oh, we can do an MS Igloo 2 thing. We'll have to make a couple other episodes, so we'll get good ideas for those 2, but we have to make this story because it's so good.
If you watch nothing else from MS Igloo, if you are a Gundam fan, watch Gravity Front 1. It is fantastic because what it is he's on Earth, the Zeons have their Zakus, the Federation does not have anything to fight these things yet, and Barbary is the guy who's like in charge of taking these things out, and he keeps losing entire units, and it is just an attempt to take out 3 Zakus in this one town in what is very explicitly an homage to Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
Because that town looks like the town from the end of Saving Private Ryan. They even, I think this is funny, all the like radio equipment and stuff they have is like World War II era radio equipment, which makes absolutely no sense for like when this is set, but also like it's cool because Barbary is screaming into a phone that is bigger than his fucking head.
You know, it's Minovsky particles or something.
Yeah.
You know,
they had to go back and take it out of a museum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is just this fight against these Zaku's that is utterly fucking hopeless. And it ends with him pointing a pistol at a Zaku and like he's fucking Tom Hanks tearing down the tank in Saving Private Ryan, except this time the tank steps on him.
Yeah, it's such a good premise for a Gundam story.
Yes.
Especially like it's one you want to see animated, right? It's like you want to see what does this like full animated version of this story of being on the front lines on Earth at the beginning of the 1 Year War when, the Earth Federation has balls, which can do kind of, yeah, right. It's a very unfortunate name, or a very fortunate name, depending on you. But it has, in
two senses of the word, they have balls.
Yes, they have the ball mobile pod weapon that they can use, but it's only operable in space, right?
Right.
They don't have anything that can fight against mobile suits at all on Earth, and I love that they respect that like original version of the timeline, because the timeline of 1 Year War stuff gets fucked around with every time. It's like, oh, when do they make the GMs and stuff like that? This is very much what the original show sort of like posits, which is for a good chunk of the early section of the war, the Earth Federation just doesn't have anything. It's why the Gundam is such a critical turning point in the war. So the Earth Federation has no weapon that it can really fight against the Zaku.
They have more men, and they have a bunch of like different weapons from the history of warfare.
Yeah.
Like in this one they're fighting with, and then the next one they're fighting with tanks, and they've got rockets and all this stuff, but they don't have that key weapon, which is what brings Zeon to the front.
Yeah.
And so he's got lots of resources, but that doesn't really fucking matter.
Yeah, and just that story of him like having to figure out like what does the Earth Federation do and how do these soldiers fight against the Zaku's. And I just think like it's such a well-written script. There are lots of really great little beats and lines that they thought of. Like I think in particular, Barbary has this line where he basically says, we went from being anti-tank specialists to anti-mobile suit specialists, and all they did was they made our rocket launchers a little bit bigger, right? Like they don't have any, nothing changed. They don't have anything else. It's just like we just took the guys who used to fight tanks and said, now you're fighting mobile suits, and we'll make it so that the explosions are a little bit bigger, but not much. And so, he also then later has a line that's like, the only tactic you have is an ambush. That's the only thing you can use to fight these things. And if you spoil the ambush, everyone's going to die. And that's it. You have this one shot with every single rocket. If you time it perfectly and hit all the spots you need to hit, you can maybe take out one Zaku if you're lucky. And that's such a great setup for a story and a great idea for exploring this little corner of the Gundam universe that you've always known in the back of your head if you watch Mobile Suit Gundam has had to have been there. There's always been this the Earth Federation had to be fighting Zaku's with fucking something or somehow for some period of time, and seeing it dramatized like this and seeing it dramatized so well is really awesome.
And I think the way they bring in the Shinigami spirit is so great, because the whole idea is that other people are calling him this because all of his people keep dying, but he survives. And so it is also about, like as I said, the Federation has plenty of manpower. They are bigger than... Zeon is this one colony over in Side 3, right? Or a set of colonies.
Yeah.
It's Side 3. The Federation is everything else. But of course, so many people are dying. There's this great line where he sees these rookies, fucking around on this post out there. And he's like, what are they doing? And he's like, they don't know any better. And there's we've lowered their training from 3 weeks to 2.
Yeah.
And it's just this sense of, have to keep renewing the pipeline of men into the military, just grinding them through this, and they're not ready, and they fuck up the whole mission, and so Barbary has to watch everyone die again, and it's and I think the Shinigami spirit as a literalization of this haunted sense this guy has, the way probably you get in some World War I stories of people who had to live in the fucking trenches and just see everyone die, in the most horrible ways. It's that kind of thing, and it's so good.
Yeah, and then it's just got the script is just so tight with the they come across the big pothole because the Zaku's are so heavy that as they attack, this town they're in used to have a mine or whatever, and so when a Zaku steps where a tunnel was, it's just going to collapse. And I think they it's a slick little bit of writing that they introduced that very casually at the beginning of the episode. That's the thing that Barbara uses to trap the Zaku, the second Zaku that he takes out. But then of course there was the third Zaku that is going to be there as soon as they mention that there's 3 Zakus and that they only see 2. It's there's got to be one more Zaku somewhere.
Yeah, I don't even know if it counts as a Pyrrhic victory, because they don't. I don't. What they lose 2 Zaku's, I guess, but then that third one just goes and stomps around, and they lost their anti-tank specialist. So fuck, like nothing really came of it.
Yeah.
But like in a really good narrative way. And also like these are still 30 minutes long, but like this is an actual 30-minute story. This is well paced. This is engaging. It's engrossing. It doesn't feel like there's a bunch of fat on it. It's good.
Yeah, really awesome episode.
Yeah. And the other 2 are great also.
Yes.
I think that first one's the best, but like these are all super strong. The second one, King of the Land, Forward. It's great because this is about tanks.
Yes.
The tank story.
Like I said with episode 2 of the original MS Igloo, they fucked up on that one with their tank story.
They fucked
They're
up real
like,
bad.
we gotta commit to it. We have to just do a story that's just tanks fighting mobile suits because that's cool. And what if the first episode of MS Igloo 2 was like borrowing a bunch of stuff from Saving Private Ryan? Well, now let's just borrow a bunch of stuff from fucking Moby Dick, and let's just do a whole Ahab thing. And there's a big white Zaku that he's obsessed with taking out.
The White Ogre.
Yes. And this is one where I feel like this episode and episode 3 have a slight problem of where the timescale doesn't entirely make sense because this war hasn't been going on for that long. So it's like, I don't know exactly when this Ahab dude would have been stepped on and like so thoroughly fucked up that he lost his leg and he's covered in scars and he still will be able to come back into military service before Odessa Day happens. Like, and episode 3 also has a problem with like how long those characters' relationships must have lasted for like this whole prison, that whole thing to happen. It's a little bit convoluted with like the timeline they have. But I don't actually give a shit. I just think it's kind of a funny thing to like note. But yes, I just think this is a really great execution of this fundamental premise of having a squad of tanks fight a group of Zakus and like what are the tactics that they have to use. And like what do these people have to be like the obsession of Captain Yandel, who is your Ahab character. Like that's who you have to be to, it's the metaphor of like, this is a giant fucking angry ass sperm whale. And what are you going to fight it with? Like a thing made of wood and some fucking pointy sticks, basically. Like, you can't fight Moby Dick. It's Moby Dick. And it's the same way that's like the White Ogre is the White Ogre. It's a Zaku. You've got a tank. You're so outclassed by what you're trying to take out.
Yes. So our Ishmael figure in this is Sergeant Ray-Ban.
Yes.
Which is a great name. Sergeant Ray-Ban Surratt, who comes in, and so he is like assigned to drive the tank. And I love the way they introduce this, where he gets in the tank to drive it, and Yandel is sitting in the turret seat, and they're separate, so they can't see each other.
Yeah.
And, like, there's a good third of this episode where you don't even see Yandel yet. You just hear his voice as he tells they're doing this training exercise with like paintballs. And is just making him do crazy shit. And it's very good. And then, of course, Ray-Ban starts seeing the death god around Yandel. And
well, it's a great reveal where that he must be able to see it because he has these really extreme reactions, but you don't confirm that he can actually see the death god until the end of the episode where he tells him, it's like, yes, I can see her. And you get the flashbacks to every other moment where you can see her hovering around him in this ghostly fashion.
And apparently all of his previous drivers of the tank were driven insane by it or died. It's great in that kind of Moby Dick tradition and with some I don't know, almost gothic horror thrown in. It's very good. And then you have the big battle where they've got 8. We think they have 8 tanks.
They have 9.
They have 9, and it's all the Type 61s having to fight the Zaku squad with the White Ogre, which, by the way, White Zaku, fucking great design. Yeah. It looks awesome. Basically, the rule of thumb is if you want to make me love a mobile suit, take a Zaku and paint it a different color. You paint it red, I love it. You paint it blue, I love it. You paint it white, I love it. It's fucking great. Give me a purple Zaku, I'll fucking buy the Gunpla.
I think there's a pink Zaku in Gundam Build Fighters, if I remember correctly. So,
well, let's hurry up so we can get there, Sean. Yeah. No, but it's fucking great. You've got Akio Otsuka as the guy in there who you never see. It's just he is pure. It's like the whale. It's just the whale doesn't have interiority. It's a fucking whale, right? And it is a great battle that is very one-sided, but Yandel's just crazy enough to do it.
Yes. There's a bunch of great moments I love when Yandel's just drive us on the thing and get us elevated, and he in the
up on a
Ray-Ban goes up on because they're fighting in this where there had been a big battle earlier in the episode where the Earth Federation just got completely vaporized. And so it's just this graveyard of destroyed tanks. He fucking drives up on one tank to angle up the shot so you can hit the Zaku in its main camera, which that's just fucking cool.
Yes, it's great. The whole battlefield, the whole scenario is really, really well done. I think all this, there's some other stuff earlier in the episode where like Yandel refuses to like go out into battle because there won't be mobile suits there. He's like, I'm not fighting if I don't get to fight in mobile suits.
He tries to like, it's weird. No, it's like my tank just seems to only ever want us to fight in mobile suits.
Yeah, it's very good. And then of course Yandel does wind up getting Snell, kills him, and then he gets a little full of himself, and they blow him up with a rocket. While Ray-Ban jumps into a pit and watches in true like Ishmael fashion.
Yes.
He has to watch Ahab die.
Yes. I don't know if like inadvertently hanging yourself on your own ship or getting hit by a rocket is. I don't know which of those is a worse death, but they're both pretty bad.
I think Ahab's is cooler, just in the it's you can't really one up that.
Yeah.
But this is definitely there's because like Yandel is like basically begging to die at that point.
Yeah.
I mean. It's what's going to happen, but it's very good. Really, this is the only one of these three that has a somewhat happy ending. Because I know Yandel dies,
but our POV character gets away. He
gets away, and Yandel got what he wanted.
Yeah.
I don't think he's that upset about dying. So there you go. Because the third one does not have a happy ending.
No, yeah.
The third one is like, if the Twilight Zone did a Gundam episode, it would be this one.
Yeah.
You are probably hearing my dogs run around upstairs.
It's a tradition. Whenever we record a podcast at your house, Jonathan, we have to have the dogs.
Yeah, they are running up above us, and they have loud feet. So there you go. But what were we saying? Episode 3. It really does have this like Twilight Zone-esque twist.
Yes.
Give us the basic setup here, Sean.
Yeah. So episode 3, Odessa Iron Storm. So this is the first time we're now intersecting with events from the TV show. So this all takes place on Odessa Day.
Which means there's mobile suits.
Yes. So now we have mobile suits, and our main character, Lieutenant Arlene Nazon. She is a pilot of the RTX 440 gun tanks, which is like a different version of the gun tank you know from the original Mobile Suit Gundam. It's like clearly like a less advanced version of the gun tank. And the whole premise is that she has she was tricked. She presumably she was a similar character to Oliver May in the previous series, that she was like an engineer working on experimental weapons. She was tricked by this guy who she trusted, and she gave military information about the gun tank to him. That information got leaked to the Zeon, so they assumed that this guy was a traitor. She got thrown into prison as being suspected of leaking military information, and then this line of gun tanks was basically like discontinued because they didn't want to make something that the Zeon forces had the design plans to. So she's pulled out of the jail with two of her basically companions, given these gun tanks, the only ones that were made, and just she's been put on this battlefield on Odessa Day, where she knows that the guy that she thought she loved and that she gave this information to is also going to be out there too.
Whose name, by the way, was Clyde Bettany, which is a great fake American name.
Yes, very good. It's Paul Bettany's younger brother, Clyde.
Oh gosh, that's like a fake Hemsworth brother. Or
yes,
something.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So it's a very, I think I probably found this one less interesting for maybe the first 20 minutes or so, because it doesn't have that same on the ground up against massive odds feeling of the other ones. But it really is the last 10 minutes and the twist they go for here, because it is cruel, especially as the third and final episode of this entire experiment.
Yeah, because the twist is that she goes so you have these big mobile fortresses called Dabides that the Zeons have, and her team takes out takes out one of them, but then she sees that there's another one there. She's ordered not to go fight it, but she's like, but the guy might be on that one. It's her whole purpose to be fighting. And she goes...
And she's the last one left. All the other gun tanks have been taken out, so she's alone on the battlefield.
Yeah. So she disobeys orders, goes to go fight it. She ends up... It's a great scene of her mad dash to get to it, dodging fire and getting fucked up. The gun tank is mostly destroyed. It rolls in the path of the thing, and she's loaded up with suicide bombs. Basically, she's going to blow it up. Then the guy comes on the radio, tries to convince her, saying, "It's you don't understand. There's something else going on here. I can't tell you." She blows up, destroys the thing, and then the Death God gives her this vision of her surviving and tells her that he was actually a double agent. that really what the plan was is that the Federation never wanted this fucking gun tank thing. They intentionally let this guy have the plans, told him, go sell to Zeon that you're a spy. We're going to plant you in the Zeon camp, and you're going to feed us information. So he has been on this thing feeding information to the Federation forces about the Zeon's plans with Odessa Day the entire time. And there are a bunch of little tiny, breadcrumbs throughout the episode that they placed that you have a sense that there's something off about what's going on. There are little things that are going unexplained. And then that clicks it all into place that she just killed, that this guy never betrayed her, that this was his job, this was his assignment, that he did care about her, like he was saying on the radio right at the end, and she didn't believe him and trust him and blew them both up. And this is the thing that the nice death god gives you right before you die, is lets you know how bad you fucked up.
Yeah, basically her spirit is separated from her body, looking at the carnage and the destruction, and she realizes it and falls to her knees and screams to the heavens. And it really, really feels like at that moment it's going to pull out and Rod Serling is going to come across the screen and go, submitted for your approval.
Yeah.
It's Twilight Zone. It is this you completely fucked up. You thought you were doing the right thing. You are hosed, and now she's dead and is going to go on to the next life in fucking eternal pain as the Shinigami has gifted her. It's such a great payoff to all the death deity stuff over these 3 episodes. And man, I don't know if they were planning on doing more at some point, and it just this run didn't do well enough or whatever, because they've never done more MS Igloo. But there is something about this as the final beat of this little experiment that makes me like the whole thing, even the first 6 a little bit. Just it's so ballsy. I love it.
Yeah. It's a great story. It's just so, and like you said about the other 2 as well, it's so much better justifies its running time than any of the episodes from the first run of episodes.
Because when I say this one felt maybe a little slow or off early on, it needs to. I want to watch it again and know the story, because you kind of have to be lulled into a sense of this seems too straightforward.
Yeah.
And it is, because the ultimate punch is that she was sort of used by the military for all of this. She goes sort of mad with anger and winds up taking out the guy who maybe through all of this we've learned helped with the whole plans for Odessa Day, so was probably really important to the Federation's plan. And it is, and then has to watch her own sin in front of her from the death god's vantage point. Man, it's good.
Yeah, it's a fucked up, very cruel story, but it's incredibly well executed. It's just the whole milieu is I think it's one of the things where the death god conceit is very extreme and kind of ridiculous for the series of episodes, but that's what makes it work.
Yes.
And again, it's the thing that I think the first set of MS Igloo episodes desperately needed something like that to give it this heightened reality, to make the really extremely self-serious tone and the uncanny CG style to land. Not having that sort of almost fantasy element in there really hurts those earlier episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I really like about MS Igloo 2 is that they give each episode its own little theme song.
Yeah.
And the 3 songs for... I actually like the theme song for Hidden 1 Year War and Apocalypse 0079.
Yeah.
They're fine. They're good. They're by an artist named Taja. But I think the 3, and they're by 3 different artists for Gravity Front, are really good and give each episode sort of its own sense of identity. And there's some really good musical moments they do with each of them. So,
I agree.
Yeah, it's really cool. Overall, when I don't want to spoil our rankings, but I will say Gravity Front would go above some of the other things we've talked about.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely.
I think, if we're talking about, Stardust Memory, because that's the same director, I think it's better than that.
I'd agree, yeah.
Yeah, it's 3 episodes. It's 90 minutes of your time. You can easily skip MS Igloo 1. There is nothing compelling you to watch that. But MS Igloo 2 is kind of a must-watch, I think, honestly.
Yeah, if you like 1 Year War,
right,
and you like that side of Gundam, it tells stories that you've wanted to see from the early parts of that war. Yeah.
And tells them creatively and in a way that feels vital and interesting. Because MS Igloo 1 also tells stories I want to see just poorly.
Yeah, the only one I would recommend for MS Igloo 1, really, unless you want to be a completionist, is the first episode. I think the first episode is an interesting enough curio, understanding where it comes from. It's 27 minutes of your time. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's like, and it's making something that I'm excited, because I forgot that whole episode was the Battle of Loom. I'm excited to go to the origin episode when we eventually get there.
Yes.
And watch that in light of, here we get the two visions of Battle of Loom. Which one is better?
The origin does the thing where it's like a POV shot
Yes.
through the whole battlefield where they're just showing off.
It's very good.
It's very good. So anyway, that is MS Igloo. Anything else to say about these two little series?
I'm glad that we watched these. Like, I think it was really up in the air for a long time about whether or not we were actually going to do MS Igloo.
Yeah.
Personally, because like where it fits in is a little bit awkward, because it's just sort of like in the mix of when Seed and 00 are coming out. But I'm glad we made the time to do it.
Me too. I enjoyed seeing these. I think if you are a completionist like us, this is far from a painful watch.
Yeah, it's more worth seeking out than some other obscure Gundam stuff like G-Evolve, which are like weird CG shorts. Like, there's some like other weird off the beaten path Gundam stuff, a lot of which I have watched, but is like really like you don't need to go see. This is, if you are into it, this is like worth watching.
And again, when you get to MS Igloo 2, there's no bones about it. It's just good Gundam.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought made for some good conversation, so I'm glad we talked about this, next time, though, this is sort of the end of Season 2, I guess we'll call it, Year 2 of Weekly Suit Gundam, because the next episode we'll be doing will be about a month from now, on June 24th, I believe, will be the 2-year anniversary of Weekly Suit Gundam, and we'll do a sequel to our 1-year anniversary episode, where we ranked the best songs, the best scores, the best characters, the best mobile suits, the best shows.
Yes.
And we're going to redo all of those with all of the stuff we've talked about since that, which includes all the 90s OVAs, Seed, Seed Destiny, 00, MS Igloo, some other little odds and ends. Year 2, we did not get to as much stuff because it was a busy, crazy year. And all that.
And some of it was us going in and filling in gaps that we hadn't done proper podcasts on.
Right. So that'll sort of be our next one. And then, I think in the background, we're going to be watching Age so that we can get to that quickly. And hopefully do those in July. But Age will be after that. And then, I think both of our hope is that Year 3 will be when we finish this thing.
I think we'll be there. One thing I want to say for the anniversary episode that I've been working on quietly in the background for about a week now is, if you remember, Jonathan, for the first anniversary episode, I had a subtitled video that I had done where I translated a Gundam interview with Amuro Ray, or not Amuro Ray, Toto Furia, the voice of Amuro Ray,
yes.
Which you can find on YouTube. You can find on YouTube just by, if you're in America, you can't find it in Japan because it was delisted from Japanese YouTube eventually, which is fine. It's completely copyrighted. The only thing I did with that was I put subtitles on, so if Japan wants to take it down, fair enough, which is 97% of the traffic of that video was just Japanese people finding it. But you can find it on American YouTube and English YouTube. If you just Google Toru Furia, it is like the third or fourth thing that's going to come up, which is weird. But
that video has 300,000 views, and you didn't put it on the Weekly Suit Gundam channel.
I put a playlist at the end link that, like, by the statistics, several thousands of people clicked on that playlist.
That's great, but it should, next time you do it, please put it on our channel.
So this is what I'm telling you right now, Jonathan. I have 5 minutes subtitled of a 6-minute video that is much more tangentially Gundam related. But I'm very close to finishing putting the subtitles on. I'll probably finish it tonight, and I'll share that with you, Jonathan, so you can put it up on our channel. Again, It is way less Gundam connected than the original one, and it's a video that dumped into my lap because I wasn't necessarily planning on doing a video, and I'm like, oh wait, I should translate this because it's dumb and funny, and I think our audience will enjoy it.
So that'll be a little anniversary surprise.
Yes, it'll be a little anniversary surprise, and I think it's very funny, and I'm excited to share it with people.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot more to go, but I think Year 3, where we will have Gundam Age, Build Fighters, G-Reco, Iron-Blooded Orphans, Thunderbolt, The Origin, and Build Divers. That's a lot, but it is going to be a really exciting year. And I'm excited to do our 2-year anniversary look back and see where we're ranking some of this stuff.
Yeah. And, for next year, for some chunk of it, I'll be unemployed, and that's just time to watch Gundam, buddy.